Chapter 947. Guardian Jean, why have you come? Guardian Li was both shocked and worried at the sight of this person. The newcomer was Jean Yulu. This was the fastest demi-human great general in the world and the most experienced demi-human. Back then, he had followed Luoluo to the capital to study and had even served as a gatekeeper in the Orthodox Academy for a very long time. After returning to the demi-human realm, he had not returned to the court, but had continued his life of farming, all the way until now. Luoluo and Xin Yuanpa had both tried to contact him, but to no avail, as his estate had always been under strict surveillance. For him to be able to leave the estate and come to the imperial palace today, those unconscious guards and maids outside the hall, was proof of how he had done all this. "Outside the hall, please follow me," Jean Yulu said to Luoluo. As the fastest expert in the world and the most senior great general of the demi-human race, even if the imperial palace was heavily guarded and spies were everywhere, if he left with Luoluo, he really might have a chance. Guardian Li looked at Luoluo, her eyes also brimming with persuasion. "At most, Empress will only punish me. She will not make things too difficult for me." Luoluo took Jean Yulu's hand, her face full of gratitude, but she did not agree to his request. Instead, she whispered a few words. "Quickly leave through the tunnel in the back of the hall." She wanted to hand over the magical artifact her father had left for her to Jean Yulu so that he would have a chance to leave through the tunnel. But before she could finish speaking, the clouds in the blue sky gathered together like a flock of sheep being led by a shepherd, blocking out the sun and shrouding all of White Emperor City in shadow. Madame Mu walked into the stone hall and calmly said to Jean Yulu, "Even a child knows that it's impossible, so why must you do this?" After a moment of silence, Jean Yulu said, "On what basis does Empress intend to kill me? Trespassing on the imperial palace or disrespecting a saint?" Madame Mu replied, "Your prestige in the tribe is too high. Not even His Majesty can lightly kill you, much less me. I just don't understand why you've been so hostile to His Majesty all these years and have targeted me so many times. Have we not been lenient enough?" Jean Yulu replied, "His Majesty naturally understands what happened in the past, and Empress should also understand what happened today." Madame Mu replied, "You should be well aware that this was not my intention alone. Last night, the chief elder sensed His Majesty's will. That's why I'm different from old Xiang and the other elders. Maybe that's why His Majesty never liked me." Jean Yulu impassively said to Madame Mu, "Even if this is His Majesty's decree, as long as I believe it to be wrong, I will still not accept it." Madame Mu replied, "As expected of Guardian Jean. Putting aside the crime of disobeying an edict, just how do you determine whether it is right or wrong?" Jean Yulu said, 800 miles of the Red River and 10,000 miles of the Yao domain. How can we hand them over to someone who is not of our race?" Madame Mu explained, "The so-called heavenly selection is the will of the ancestral spirits. No matter what race one is from, as long as one is accepted by the celestial trees and baptized by the wildfire, one's bloodline will completely transforming into the true body of the demi-human emperor and henceforth become a member of the White Emperor clan. How could one be considered an outsider?" Jean Yulu looked into her eyes and said, "This is your arrangement for the second prince?" Madame Mu replied, "All the people participating in the heavenly selection ceremony must obey the arrangements of fate, and this is the fairest method." Jean Yulu asked, "You suddenly announced this matter so suddenly that the human race had no time to respond or send anyone to participate. What sort of fairness is this?" Madame Mu indifferently said, "What does this have to do with Guardian Jean? Are you colluding with the people of Zhou?" Jean Yulu sternly said, "What do you think of Her Highness? She is the disciple of His Holiness the Pope, so she might also be colluding with the people of Zhou? So even though you clearly know that her meridians have already been repaired and that she only needs enough time to smoothly inherit the throne, you still insist on forcefully activating the heavenly selection ceremony?" Madame Mu replied, "I understand her situation better than any of you. I hope that she can obtain happiness, but I will not give her any misconceptions." Jin Lu asked. Misconceptions or lies? Empress, these words of yours can't even deceive yourself. So how can you convince Her Highness? They did not try to hide their words from Luo, so Luo could clearly hear them. With these final words, the stone hall became abnormally quiet. At this point, it was no longer possible to continue the conversation. Madame Mu lightly waved her sleeve and flipped her jade hand. A gust of wind blew through the stone hall, and a massive hand condensed from clear light slapped at Jin Lu. Countless ear-piercing screeches resounded through the hall. The air jolted into countless turbulences. Jin Lu transformed into a blur, avoiding the massive hand and retreating off the stone platform. Madame Mu's expression did not change. She took a step forward, her sleeve flapping once more. The white clouds gathered over White Emperor City suddenly descended several li, becoming extremely low as if they wanted to approach the mountains on the opposite shore. Those with good eyesight could even see the droplets of rain gathering in the clouds. As the clouds descended, an unimaginable pressure descended, enveloping White Emperor City, especially the stone hall at the highest point. A groan came from the platform, and the blur behind Jin Lu that seemed to melt into the world paused. He was extremely strong, but if he wanted to contend against an expert of the divine domain, he needed to push his speed to the limit for even a sliver of a chance. But Madame Mu only needed a wave of her sleeve to borrow the might of the world and the pressure of the clouds to break his movement technique. The clouds in the sky were getting closer and closer to the ground. The towering trees on the opposite shore of the Red River were almost completely gone, and the pressure falling on the stone hall was getting stronger and stronger. The unconscious guards and maids began to moan in pain, and Guardian Li found it extremely difficult to breathe. Jin Lu's figure was getting clearer and clearer. The clearer the blur, the slower he was. The moment his figure completely appeared, Jin Lu would receive Madame Mu's thunderous strike. This scene did not happen, because Luo had walked to Madame Mu's side. She pulled on Madame Mu's sleeve, raised her small face, and opened her eyes wide as she very seriously said a few words. "Mother, please don't be like this." The black clouds pressed down on the city, but the city was not destroyed. Without even a drop of rain falling, they returned to the sky and gradually dispersed. Jin Lu had fled the imperial palace, presumably unable to return to the fields he had cultivated for so many years. No one knew where he had gone. Guardian Li and the guards and maids withdrew, leaving the stone hall in absolute silence. Only Madame Mu and Luo remained. Many people think that I'm doing this for my own selfish desires. Madame Mu looked into Luo's eyes and asked, "Do you also think this way?" Luo was quiet for a very long time. She did not directly answer this question, but asked a rather strange question. "Mother, after all these years, do you still miss home?" Chapter 948. Anyone would miss home. Even when Luo had spent the happiest years of her life in the capital's Orthodox Academy, she would often miss home. She missed her father, she missed her mother, she missed those big fellows in the Red River, and she missed those birds on the celestial tree. Of course, she didn't think it was wrong, but very good. At the very least, it seems that you're willing to believe that I'm not acting for my own selfish desires, even though you now believe that I'm acting for the great Western continent. Madame Mu calmly looked at her and said, "I do not deny that the great Western continent is my home, but your maternal grandfather and grandmother have both passed away. Do you think I would value the great Western continent more than White Emperor City? The rumors are all false. Why would I let you marry your cousin?" Luo was shocked when she heard this. Although she had no actual authority, she was still the only princess of the demi-human race and had an extremely high status in White Emperor City. Moreover, people like the Xiong clan leader of the Council of Elders had doted on her ever since she was a child. Even if she did not ask around, many things could not be hidden from her. For instance, she easily learned that the source of this rumor was a certain guard of the Abyssal Pearl Pavilion, and this guard was Madame Mu's most loyal subordinate. Because of this, she never thought that the rumor would be wrong. Her mother didn't want her to marry her cousin. Then why had the great Western continent's diplomatic mission come? Why had the great elder sent someone this morning to inform him that his second cousin's name had already entered the list of participants in the heavenly selection ceremony? This is your father's and my idea. For safety reasons, we haven't told anyone, including you. Madame Mu said, in a little while, the heavenly selection ceremony will begin. I think it's about time to tell you. Luo asked, Mother, what is it? Madame Mu rubbed her head and said, Of course it's still about your marriage. Luo was very nervous and inexplicably uneasy. What Guardian Jean said is naturally correct, and the great elder is also not wrong. You yourself are naturally even clearer. His Holiness, the Pope, truly did repair your meridians. As long as you are given enough time, you will definitely be able to cultivate the techniques of the White Emperor clan to the highest level and become the next White Emperor. Madame Mu solemnly said, But your father and I are both very worried that there's not enough time. Luo said, I don't understand what you mean. Madame Mu said, You are the only princess of the demi-human race. You should do something for this place. Luo understood and fell silent. From a very young age, she knew that she had to bear the responsibility. Chun Changsheng was also very clear about this, so he never asked her to do anything. If the demi-human race's situation was not good, she would have to make contributions, and there was not much time for her to mature into the new White Emperor. Then she should be like those princesses in the past tens of thousands of years, seeking benefits for the demon clan through marriage. This was her marriage, an alliance marriage. Her mother had done the same thing back then. Marry into Xiulao City, Madame Mu said as she looked into Loloa's eyes. All the puzzles were solved at this moment. Loloa's face instantly turned pale as she whispered, Why? Madame Mu said, The demon lord of this generation is truly an extraordinary individual. Only he is worthy of you. Luo said, Mother, you know I'm not asking about this. This was not a simple marriage. It was not a matter of sex, and it was not a matter of equal social status. Why? Of course, it's for the future of the demi-human race. Madame Mu looked into her eyes and said, At present, the human race's luck is flourishing. I originally thought that after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, with the successive deaths of the storms of the 8 directions, the human race would have a period of peace. Who could have expected that in just a few short years, Wang Pe, the Mountly sect master, and the Prince of Xiang would all break through? Moreover, Mao Qiuyu is already at the threshold, and there's also Liang Wang's son and Xiao Zhang, your teacher, Su Yurong, and Qiu Shanjun. The number of experts of the human race will quickly recover, perhaps even surpass what it was in the past. Coupled with Shang Xingzhou's methods, who on the continent will be a match for them. What will they do after they exterminate the demons? Are you willing to see the people of the demi-human race kneel before the iron hooves of the humans? Luo was quiet for a while, then said, The demons are probably more worried about these things than we are. Madame Mu replied, Correct, so we need not doubt Xiulao City's sincerity and resolve. Luo raised her head and asked, But what about the hatred between the two sides? Mother, how will you convince the Council of Elders, the ministers, and the generals? Madame Mu replied, I've already convinced many people. Crucially, I've already convinced your father, so who would dare to oppose? Luo thought about how the chief elder had not seen her father when he entered the mountain last night, but had returned with a massive change in attitude. She vaguely guessed at something, but this was not enough to convince her. Moreover, just as Madame Mu had said, perhaps no one in the demi-human race would dare to oppose this marriage, but she could. She looked at Madame Mu and said, If it's for the future of the demi-human race, given my relationship with teacher, the orthodoxy will assuredly support us. When the time comes, even if the great Zhou imperial court wants to send soldiers to attack, it will first have to resolve its internal problems. Madame Mu said, First, you must be sure that your teacher Chun Changsheng can obtain victory in this war. Moreover, you must be sure that he and Shang Xingzhou, master and disciple, are truly enemies, and not some scheme to deceive us in Xiulao City. Luo replied, Teacher is not that sort of person. It's already been 5 years since the two of you met. 5 years is enough time to change many things. Moreover, even if the two of you are master and disciple, compared to the greater powers of the world, this relationship is still not stable enough. Perhaps it's strong enough to affect the relationship between the human race and the demi-human race. You understand what I mean? Madame Mu tenderly said, unless he is willing to abandon Su Yurong and marry you. In that case, I will immediately end the heavenly selection ceremony. Luoluo opened her eyes wide and innocently said, how could teacher marry me? I'm a student. Madame Mu smirked at her. Do you only treat him as teacher? Luoluo nodded. Of course. Madame Mu rubbed her head and said, silly child, even if you can deceive me, how can you deceive yourself? The morning breeze blew in through the window, carrying with it the unique smell of lime from the beast dances and the increasingly intense, or perhaps cheerful, beating of the drums. Madame Mu left. She wanted to go to the myriad beast platform in front of the imperial palace to preside over today's heavenly selection ceremony. Luoluo sat in front of the stone window, somewhat discouraged. Dejectedly, she began to tear at the gardenia flowers she had picked this morning. Just like what Madame Mu had said before she left, even if she could deceive everyone in the continent, how could she deceive herself? Chapter 949. Guardian Li walked in and looked at her, wanted to say something but hesitating. Luoluo knew what she was thinking and softly said, Mother and I think differently. That would be of no benefit to the great Western continent. Guardian Li sadly said, does your highness really have to be married off to such a distant place? It had been more than 2,000 years since a demi-human princess had been married off to Xiuelao City. Luo silently thought, if this really can prevent wars from erupting, perhaps it really is a good thing, and also good for teacher. But that young demon lord probably would not participate in the heavenly selection ceremony. So what was the liveliness outside the palace? Even if that young demon lord wanted to marry her, he would not remain in White Emperor City to wait to inherit the throne. So, how would this story end? The great Western continent's diplomatic mission had arrived, and the heavenly selection ceremony had begun. The celestial trees on the two shores of the Red River, deep in the clouds, began to drone. Although it was rumored that the Empress had chosen the second prince of the great Western continent as husband for Princess Luoluo, many young demi-human experts still left the forest that very night and set out for White Emperor City. The vast majority of them had arrived at White Emperor City several days ago and had made their preparations. Since the Council of Elders had succeeded in having this matter proceed according to the rules of the demi-human race, anyone could be chosen. As long as one could become a candidate, the rest would be left to the wildfire of the celestial trees and left to the ancestral spirits to choose. Would the ancestral spirits of the tribes favor the outsiders of the great Western continent? In the early morning, the morning sun was unable to tear through the thick fog shrouding the two shores of the Red River. The sky was still dim, but White Emperor City was already awake. The rhythmic beating of war drums resounded from every place. The demi-humans of different tribes prostrated themselves to those massive trees in the distance, bowed, and then began to dance. As the sacrificial ceremony continued, the figures of the 9 giant trees gradually became clearer. Although they were dozens of miles away, they could feel that the temperature had risen a lot. It was as if many invisible flames were rising from the ground and spreading along the bodies of the giant trees into the world. To the sound of different war drums, the banners of different tribes waved in the streets of White Emperor City. Young experts from the vast demi-human domain, accompanied by their fathers and companions, walked out of the meeting houses of their tribes, their faces filled with hope and nervousness as they made their way to the imperial palace at the highest point. The crowd gradually congregated, a dense sea of people, yet there was no noise, only a palpitating silence. In the deepest part of this silent sea, there was a carriage that was very eye-catching. This was because this carriage did not carry an ordinary banner, but a royal banner, flapping in the wind. Countless gazes fell on the carriage. No matter how confident and arrogant the young experts of the various tribes were, They all subconsciously revealed expressions of awe when they saw the royal flag. This was because the royal flag represented the most powerful aristocratic clan in the southern part of the Yao region, and because a man was sitting under the royal flag. The man's expression was indifferent. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and a yellow light occasionally flashed in his eyes. The aura emitted from his body was extremely powerful, even a little terrifying. He was the most talented demi-human expert in the last 200 years. After Wang Pa had broken through and Xiao Zhang had been placed on the wanted list, his position on the Proclamation of Liberation had already risen to third place. Xiao was his name, and Shi was his surname. He represented the will of the southern demi-human race. More importantly, his own will was extremely formidable, and the entire continent knew that in the last few years, his most resolute will had been to marry Princess Luoluo and become the next White Emperor. To no one's surprise, he, who had remained silent in the turmoil of the last few days, had finally appeared. An expert of this level was about to participate in the heavenly selection ceremony. Just who could be his match? The second prince of the great western continent had long since woken up. After washing up, he held a book in his hands and seemed to have heard something. After a few moments of silence, the corners of his lips perked up into an incomprehensible smile. He put down the book, took a bright yellow belt, and walked out of the imperial palace. The thick fog did not disperse, seeming to fuse with the yellow sand on the ground. The young demon lord was not sleeping in his room. Instead, he was lying on the sand, his hands behind his head, one leg crossed, and his eyes closed. He seemed particularly at ease. If his identity was known, he would definitely be surrounded and killed. However, he didn't seem to care about this at all. The increasingly loud sound of the war drums didn't affect him at all. After an unknown period of time, he opened his eyes, got up, brushed off the yellow sand on his body, and walked to the back door. He calmly gazed at the two stone statues, took a bamboo hat, put on his head, and then left. The two stone statues had also disappeared. Their original positions were empty, with only the sand gently blown about by the morning breeze, ultimately burying yesterday's golden blood. Xin Yuan had woken up very early. To be more precise, he had not slept much last night. Because of that incomprehensible couple in a room, he had sat in the courtyard for an entire night. But his lack of sleep had nothing to do with his lack of comfort. It was just that he was rather nervous about what was about to happen. The beating of the war drums was so clear, each sound urging him to set out on his journey. But before this, he still had some things to do. This was a habit he had developed from following Chun Changsheng in the Orthodox Academy. The more important the matter, the calmer he had to be. Even if he could not calm his mind, he had to at least complete the most important task. He opened the door and walked in. Through the paper door, he asked, "I'm going to buy breakfast. What do you want to eat?" 9 massive celestial trees were faintly discernible in the fog, exuding invisible yet incomparably real waves of heat. There were no gales from the western sea, but the Red River began to surge with massive waves. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was so loud that it inspired fear in anyone who heard it. No demi-human felt fear. They knew that this was the disturbance caused by the massive monsters that lived in the Red River. The massive monsters that lived in the Red River were called the Jings. They had unimaginably massive bodies, but they had an extremely gentle temperament. They fed on the red algae that grew endlessly in the river and never harmed any living creature. They were viewed by the demi-humans as protectors. The massive waves in the Red River today were the Jings sensing the change in the wildfire and celebrating. White Emperor City was also a scene of celebration. Although they were still rather uneasy about the rumor and the tense situation of the last 2 days, the heavenly selection ceremony was still a rare occasion for the demi-human race. The populace threw these emotions to the back of their minds and began to dance to the incessant beating of the war drums. The hundreds of stone walls that were used to divide the streets were filled with demonic citizens. It looked like the stone walls had been raised overnight, but it was not neat enough. The citizens looked at the youths who were walking towards the arenas, waving their arms, shouting, and jumping. The new stone walls seemed to be a few centimeters taller. It truly felt like the entire world was celebrating. Chapter 950. The Heavenly Selection Ceremony was the most important event of the demi-human race, but the related sacrificial ceremony was extremely simple, very much in line with the demi-human race's usual temperament. The morning light had just driven away some of the fog when the sacrificial ceremony came to an end and the truly important and attention-grabbing formal process began. The formal process was similarly simple, divided into 3 stages. The first was the selection of 9 people with the right to enter the celestial tree through the fighting arena. After that, the 9 candidates would enter the ground through the trunk of the celestial tree. They would be bathed in wildfire and undergo the ancestral spirits test. If more than one candidate passed this test, then they would have to fight again until the final victor was chosen. This would be the so-called Heaven's Chosen One. If one carefully analyzed the entire process, one could see the painstaking efforts of the ancestors of the demi-human race from countless years ago. If it was just to simplify matters, when the rules of the heavenly selection were established, the second stage, the trial of the ancestral spirits, could have been placed at the last stage. The current sequence showed that the heavenly selection ultimately depended on one's own strength. For the demi-human race to survive in such a savage and dangerous environment and gradually grow stronger, they had never relied on the protection of their ancestors or the mercy of the heavens, but on their will to overcome the heavens. Based on these ideals, even though they knew that they had no chance of becoming the final victor, many young tribal experts had still participated in today's heavenly selection ceremony. Several dozen fighting platforms were scattered across the different districts and tribal settlements of White Emperor City, awaiting the arrival of these warriors. The Carp tribe, which was the best at counting and the most impartial among the demi-humans, sent many experienced and prudent members to judge the outcome. The imperial court of the demi-humans and the council of elders sent supervising officials to record the entire process of what happened in each arena and could raise questions at any time. All the demi-human commoners of White Emperor City had already left their houses and were making their way to the fighting platforms, preparing to witness this once-in-a-century spectacle. The fighting platforms that received the most attention were near the Imperial Palace and Heaven's Guard Pavilion. They were so packed that not even a drop of water could trickle through. These fighting platforms received the most attention because they were closest to the Imperial Palace's observation platform, so they were most easily noticed by the Empress and the important figures of the Council of Elders. Those who dared to ascend these platforms were naturally not mediocre people. They were assuredly able to see many famous figures like Xiaoda. The crowd parted like the tide. Escorted by the tribal elders and experts, Xiaoda made his way to the fighting platform. Along the way, many people loudly cheered for him. The demi-human race worshipped the strong. As the publicly acknowledged supreme expert of the middle generation, Xiaoda enjoyed great prestige on the 2 shores of the Red River, and his tribe was also extremely powerful. He had many supporters in the demi-human court and the council of elders. In the view of many demi-human commoners, even if the Empress selfishly favored her nephew, the ultimate victor of this heavenly selection ceremony would still be him. Only a person like him had the right to marry Princess Luluo, had the right to become the next sovereign of the demi-human race. Xiaoda walked onto the platform, glanced at his opponent, and expressionlessly said, "You're not my match." His temperament had always been cold and arrogant. Moreover, he was somewhat cruel and ruthless. Naturally, he would not be polite with his words, and this was because his temperament had changed a lot. Otherwise, he wouldn't even bother to talk to him. His opponent was a middle-aged expert of the Meng tribe. In any other fighting platform, he might have been able to go very far, but this middle-aged Meng tribe expert's luck was truly terrible. In his first match, he had actually encountered the legendary Xiaoda. It was hard to avoid some regret and unwillingness in the depths of his solemn eyes. Logically speaking, he should have conceded and retreated when he knew he was no match, but this middle-aged Meng tribe expert did not do this. This was because the demi-human race possessed an extremely valiant will to fight and valued their reputation above all else, even more than their lives. He said to Xiaoda, If you retreat because you are not my match, then Sir will regret that you will not encounter any more challenges today. The Meng tribe expert's words expressed his respect for Xiaoda, as well as his attitude. The apathetic yellow luster in Xiaoda's eyes faded, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. You're not bad. I will use my full strength. The Meng tribe expert was not alarmed by these words. On the contrary, he felt honored and said, "Thank you." Xiaoda took off his cloak and threw it outside the fighting platform. Looking at the Meng tribe expert, he said, "You first." Thus, the first match of the heavenly selection ceremony began without any novelty. The demi-human race did everything very directly, very simply, and also very violently, whether it was eating, doing business, engaging in political struggles, or truly fighting. Just like the countless battles that took place on the two shores of the Red River every day, today's match was also completely without novelty. Deafening collisions rang out incessantly, dust flew, the earth quaked, and the winds howled. The result of this match was also completely without novelty. Xiaoda naturally obtained victory, and he fulfilled the promise he had made before the match. His fists and legs did not hold back at all, his style berserk to the extreme. He only used 3 moves to heavily injure the Meng tribe expert. The blood on the sand-covered fighting platform was a ghastly sight. Many of the Meng tribe expert's bones had been broken. His eyes were closed, and he seemed like he could die at any moment. A demi-human court medical official hurried to the platform with several military doctors and medicine chests. But the Meng tribe expert's injuries were so severe that he could not stop the bleeding even after a long while. If this were any other sacrificial ceremony or match, the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes would naturally send priests. The sacred light technique had a miraculous effect in treating injuries like this and could presumably save the Meng tribe expert's life. However, today was the heavenly selection ceremony. The orthodoxy was already considering the greater picture by not making trouble. So how could they send priests to help? Seeing that the Meng tribe expert was on the verge of death, the cheers around the fighting platform gradually died down and became rather quiet. The demi-human race respected experts the most and loved fighting the most, so they had seen this sort of scene many times. But when they thought about how this Meng tribe expert of clearly extraordinary strength was about to die, the crowd couldn't help but feel rather strange. After you cure him, remember to tell him that he still has to pay for his medicine. Xiaoda suddenly threw an earthen yellow pill into the hands of the demi-human court medical official and expressionlessly said, then walked off the fighting platform. The demi-human court medical official froze at the sight of the earthen yellow pill, and then an expression of disbelief appeared on his face. The crowd around the fighting platform began to whisper to each other, and then to shout in shock. Could that be a yellow tree thorn? It can't be, right? The yellow tree thorn was a pill brewed from the sap of a rare plant in the south of the demi-human domain. It had the miraculous effect of staunching blood and reviving the soul. It was produced in very small quantities and was extremely precious. Other than the few pills sent to the imperial palace and the council of elders every year, the vast majority of the world's yellow tree thorns were under the control of the landowning households. As an expert that had been raised and supported by the entire Shur clan, Xiaoda naturally carried yellow tree thorns on him. However, no one could have imagined that after heavily injuring the Meng clan expert, he would so generously use such a precious pill to save his life. The crowd was stunned to the extreme as Xiaoda walked out of the fighting platform. They felt that his figure was even larger than the rumors made it out to be. No matter how scorching the gazes from the crowd were, no matter how much reverence there was in the discussions, Xiaoda's expression did not change. It was still indifferent. The fighting platform continued. There was still some time before his next match. He passed through the crowd and returned to his carriage, escorted by the experts of his tribe. The clan leader had been sitting in the carriage the entire time. As he gazed at Xiaoda, the expression on the clan leader's face was rather strange, gratified and indifferent, but also somewhat confused. You've changed a lot in these last few years. Xiaoda fell quiet for a while, then replied, Change is because there is a reason for change. Chapter 9:51. No one knew the reason for Xiaoda's change, because no one dared to ask him, not even the leader of the Shi clan. The entire demi-human race knew that he was very callous and bad-tempered, even though he truly had changed a great deal. But many important personages of the demi-human race had guessed at something. This was because Xiaoda's change had begun several years ago. At the time, he had just returned from the distant capital of the human race. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, he had joined forces with painted armor Xiao Zhang and the Tang's second master to charge into the great Zhou imperial palace, bathing in blood and fighting. Both his mind and will had endured a massive test. But that was not the turning point for Xiaoda's change, because he had been the victor at the time. What truly moved Xiaoda and caused him to begin to change was an incident that occurred in the winter of that year. In the snowstorm that enveloped the capital, Chun Changsheng wanted to kill Zhou Tong. Xiaoda had followed Madame Mu's orders and cooperated with the great Zhou imperial court to prevent him from killing Zhou Tong and to seize the opportunity to kill him. At the time, Xiaoda was above Chun Changsheng in both cultivation and strength, and he also had many star condensation assassins as his helpers. But the final result was Zhou Tong's death, his death by 1,000 cuts. Chun Changsheng had not died, nor had he been defeated. Although many things had happened that day, not even a battle between Xiaoda and Chun Changsheng, this matter still made Xiaoda feel a massive setback. He could not understand why. Why was Chun Changsheng so much younger than him? Why was it that his cultivation was also lower, yet he could do what he could not? He seriously pondered this question for a very long time, but he still could not come to a conclusion. Since he could not understand, then what would happen if he did what he did? The so-called change had probably begun from that moment. There was no more sufficient reason for change than this. Whether it was his personality or that yellow tree thorn, they were all the same. To the north of Heavensgar Pavilion was the Imperial City. The fighting platform that was closest to the Imperial City. The second prince of the great western continent stood on that platform, because he had walked out of the Imperial City and he did not want to go too far. He only wanted to do a few things that had to be done. The outcome was already decided, so there was no need to go too far and waste his strength. Not long after Xiaoda obtained his first victory, the second prince of the great western continent also won. His victory was also a matter of course, an understatement. From the beginning to the end, he had a casual smile on his face. He didn't say a word, nor did he take out any precious pills to give to his defeated opponent, because his opponent didn't suffer any serious injuries, and could even walk down the stage by himself. Since he was able to leave the arena, he could naturally fight again. With the Yao race's desire for battle and the importance they placed on their reputation, his opponent retreating just like that could only mean that he had no chance of winning the previous battle. The difference in strength between the two sides was so great that his confidence had been crushed into powder. The morning mist gradually dispersed, and the morning sun hung in the depths of the distant mountains like a fake red ball. The Imperial City's observation platform was to the east. Other than the 3 stone halls of the Imperial Palace, it was the highest place in all of White Emperor City, allowing one to overlook the entire city. Today, White Emperor City was rather strange. The majority of the streets were extremely quiet. Not a single person in sight, but there were several dozen places that were extremely lively, precisely where the fighting platforms were located. The stone walls were packed with figures, looking from a distance like ants. Several hundred Red River Beast Guard warily watched the activity below, their hands tightly gripping leather ropes. The ends of the ropes were wrapped around the necks of black vultures. If anything strange happened below, they would ride the black vultures and suppress the situation as quickly as possible. This was much more convenient than the flying carriages they had used last night to search for the fugitives. The important personages on the observation platform all had strange expressions on their faces, many of them looking at an elder. The loser had come from this elder's tribe. He had been famous for a long time, and his methods were unyielding. He had originally been an opponent that some faction in the Council of Elders had deliberately arranged for the second prince of the great western continent. Yes, there were many important personages in the demi-human race that were not willing to see the Empress's nephew become the next White Emperor. Although the wildfire of the celestial trees truly could transform the soul and the body, and although the fairness of the heavenly selection ceremony was unquestionable, they were still unwilling. A few demi-human elders had originally believed that they could use these arrangements to easily stop the second prince of the great western continent, but they had not expected their first match to end in such a speechless defeat. The second prince of the great western continent had still not revealed his true strength. Would his subsequent arrangements be effective? The gazes of many important personages once more fell upon that mountainous figure. The chief elder was truly worthy of being the leader of the Xiong clan. Just like his long-lived clansmen, he treasured every moment of rest. At this moment, his eyes were closed as if he were sleeping. Was he not worried about anything? Suddenly, the chief elder opened his eyes and looked at the fighting platform on the meadow to the west of Heaven's Guard Pavilion. His eyes were calm and without ripples, not like the oldest well, but the quietest of pools. Yet at this moment, a chill flitted through the pool. Several powerful elders also sensed it. They followed the chief elder to the fighting platform on the meadow, their expressions slightly surprised. The chief elder turned his head and glanced up. After a moment of silence, he closed his eyes, either resting or sleeping. Even higher than the imperial city's observation platform was the stone hall. Madame Mu sat on a stone chair in front of the hall, looking down at White Emperor City. Her face was expressionless, as if she had sensed nothing. Heaven's Guard Pavilion was where the demi-human race held their spring sacrifices. Like the imperial palace and the vast majority of the buildings in White Emperor City, it was built from stone. It was just that a green river had been added to the perimeter, and the ancient trees that had been planted there for more than 1,000 years made it seem even more peaceful and secluded. The meadow to the west was especially beautiful in the morning light. Because of the meadow and the green river, although there were many spectators on this platform, they were separated relatively far away, so they did not clearly see what had happened. In fact, they did not even see as clearly as those important figures on the distant observation platform of the imperial city. They only knew that victory and defeat had been decided. An elder of the Carp tribe responsible for determining victory and defeat gazed at the person still standing on the fighting platform. He wanted to say something, but he suddenly felt a little diffident and could only shake his head. The loser of the match had already been carried away. He had no external injuries, but he was unconscious. It was hard to tell what method the loser had used, but it was a particularly strange sight. The person on the stage was also very strange. He wore a bamboo hat that covered his entire face, but everyone who saw him could feel that he was very young. Moreover, his body naturally exuded a kind of cold and gloomy aura, which even the gradually brightening morning light and the morning breeze could not dampen in the slightest. A member of the Council of Elders responsible for supervising the match narrowed his eyes at the young man in the bamboo hat and sternly asked, "Which tribe are you from?" Chapter 952. The young man asked, "Does the heavenly selection need to report one's background?" His voice was very flat, without any undulations. It was like water, calm and rippleless water. But if a truly powerful figure were present, they might be able to tell that this was not water, but ice. Only 10,000-year-old frost could do this. The distant spectators were in an uproar. No one had expected this person to react so coldly and unyieldingly. The heavenly selection ceremony was called the heavenly selection, but from its rules, one could clearly see that it emphasized self-improvement. Whether it was the protection of the ancestral spirits or self-improvement, there was no need to care about one's identity or background. Since ancient times, none of the heavenly selection ceremonies had needed to state this point. The member of the Council of Elders was momentarily at a loss for words. He angrily said to the young man, "I hope that you can keep your bamboo hat on today." The morning light gradually brightened. Although it was deep winter, it still had its own warmth. The red sun in the distant mountains rose higher and higher. The damp mist shrouding the two shores of the Red River had already dispersed, leaving the scenery clear and beautiful. The matches on the fighting platforms of White Emperor City were also in full swing, with countless spectacular and dangerous scenes constantly appearing. In the streets, on the stone walls, by the meadows, in front of the imperial city, the demi-human populace's crude cheers rang out incessantly, occasionally accompanied by cries of surprise. Many well-known young demi-human experts defeated their opponents, but there were also many dark horses. A few characters elected from small tribes deep in the mountains displayed unexpected levels of strength. The fighting platforms near the Imperial Palace and Heaven's Guard Pavilion were naturally the center of everyone's attention. They were quieter, their gazes more focused. As the heavenly selection ceremony progressed, the vast majority of gazes fell upon the 3 fighting platforms. 3 people stood on each of the 3 fighting platforms. Xiaoda, the second prince of the great western continent, and a young man wearing a bamboo hat. As the strongest expert of the demi-human race's middle generation and the empress's nephew, Xiaoda and the second prince of the great western continent were naturally the focus of attention. But right now, even more gazes, especially those of the important figures on the imperial city's observation platform, were focused on the young man in the bamboo hat. The young man in the bamboo hat was far too mysterious. Up until now, besides the name on the register whose authenticity was unknown, no one actually knew his identity and background. That young man seemed to possess some sort of magical power. None of his opponents had the chance to make a move. Just as they stepped onto the stage, they would mysteriously collapse and fall unconscious. Up until now, this young man had already won 4 matches in a row. Whether it was the deacon of the Carp tribe responsible for judging the outcome, the member of the Council of Elders responsible for supervising the matches, or even the great general of the demi-human court, Chong Xinghe, who had gone to observe the 3rd match, none of them could tell what technique he was using. Who was he? Which tribe did he come from? While the vast majority of the crowd was focused on the imperial city and Heaven's Guard Pavilion, while the few important figures who knew the inside story were looking at the young man in the bamboo hat with complicated emotions, something was also happening on a remote fighting platform. However, it had not attracted the attention of any of the demi-human crowd. This fighting platform was located in the poor district of White Emperor City, the Pine Paths. It was very remote, but it was also very close to the river. The Jings were happily rolling and celebrating in the Red River. Countless stenches of blood were stirred up from the mud at the bottom of the river and carried to the shore by the wind. It was a nauseating smell, so no expert would be willing to come here. Early in the morning, the war drums had just begun to sound in the upper city, gradually reaching the pine paths. The thin layer of yellow sand covering the stone platform that had been built overnight began to tremble slightly. But other than the Carp tribe's judge, 2 supervisors, and related officials, no one else could be seen. Although the heavenly selection ceremony was a celebration for the entire world, life still had to go on. The people living at the bottom of the pine paths still had to work, or else they would go hungry at night. Compared to going hungry, the matches on the fighting platform were very interesting, but they could only wait. Before working, they naturally had to first fill their stomachs. Smoke began to rise from all sorts of crude stone stoves. In the somewhat blackened wok of oil that had been used for many days, all sorts of pasta began to swell and then painfully spit out bubbles. The demi-human populace, whose faces had not even been washed, yawned as they lined up. Xin Yuanpa had not slept much last night, so he had woken up rather early. As a result, he had managed to buy breakfast before the crowd. There was a faint mist in the courtyard at the end of the alley, coming from the kettle on the stove. There was also a faint mist behind the paper door of the room, coming from the divinity of the steaming white steamed buns and meat buns in the torn paper bags. Biang Hong and Wu Qiong were eating steamed buns. Xin Yuan Po was eating a meat bun. This bun was not much smaller than his face, and when he took a bite, its fragrance and juices flowed out. Wu Qiong had a nasty complexion as she asked, "Why are you eating buns while we eat steamed buns?" Xin Yuan couldn't be bothered to pay attention to her. He continued to eat the buns, occasionally sucking off the juices that dripped onto his fingers. Wu Qiong's complexion turned even nastier, her voice shrill as she said, "Are you eating just for us to see? Get out." Xin Yuan continued to ignore her. After a night of rest, Biang Hong felt a little better, but the deathly intent in his eyes had still been driven away. He looked at Xian Yuan Pa and asked, "What are the fillings of this bun?" "Beef and scallions." Xian Yuan Pa mumbled his answer. Biang Hong sighed and said, "It's truly fragrant." Only then did Xian Yuan Pa react. He hurriedly swallowed the food in his mouth and then seriously explained, "Teacher, I wasn't trying to be greedy for you, but principal said that after being injured, one shouldn't eat too oily food. So should just drink the porridge in your bowl. It's fine if you don't eat the steamed buns." The principal he spoke of was naturally Qin Changsheng. Qin Changsheng placed great importance on his health, so the people of the Orthodox Academy, including Xian Yuan Pa, were naturally deeply affected. Biang Hong chuckled. Wu Qiong Bai viciously said, "Eat your buns and stuff yourself to death." Xian Yuan Pa ignored her, continuing to explain to Biang Hong, "Today, I will have to expend a lot of energy, so I need to eat my fill." Although Biang Hong was heavily injured, his spiritual sense was still sharp. He could clearly hear the war drums outside the courtyard and the chatter on the street. Hearing Xian Yuan Po's words and recalling how he had said last night that he had something to do in the next 2 days, he vaguely understood. He asked, "You want to participate in the heavenly selection ceremony?" Wu Qiongbai had a solitary personality, but she was extremely experienced. She knew what the heavenly selection ceremony meant to the demi-human race. After a momentary pause, a derisive smile appeared on her face. She jeered at Xian Yuan. "A simple-minded bear like you actually dares to have the extravagant hopes of marrying the White Emperor's daughter?" No matter how good Xian Yuan Po's temper was, he still found it somewhat difficult to restrain himself. He sullenly said, "And what do you know?" Wu Qiong-bai's gaze fell on his clearly withered and powerless right arm. She sneered, "I only know that you are a piece of trash." Biang Hong also noticed the abnormality in Xian Yuan Po's right arm, but his reaction was different from Wu Qiong-bai's. With a slightly surprised expression, he asked, "You cultivate the heavenly Thunderbringer?" Chapter 9:53. Xian Yuan Po was somewhat shocked. No one had ever been able to see through the technique he cultivated, but now Biang Hong had pointed it out. Biang Hong saw his expression and knew that he had guessed correctly. He asked, "This was the technique Qin Changsheng chose for you?" Xian Yuan Po nodded. Biang Hong praised, "I've always believed that he was extremely talented in cultivation, but I didn't think that his insight would also be excellent. This principal is very competent." Xian Yuan Po thought it over, then replied, "That's not really the case." Biang Hong glanced at his right arm and said, "I can see that you've practiced it quite well, but there seems to be some problems." Xian Yuan Po did not care. He used a piece of paper to wipe the meat juices from his fingers. Biang Hong's voice rang out once more, entering his ears and then his heart. Heavenly Thunderbringer is concealing the heavenly thunder, concealing wind and thunder in the absence of signs. You are correct on this point, and you can even say that you've cultivated it extremely well. Biang Hong added, "But it's a little too deliberate." Xian Yuan raised his head and asked in surprise, "Teacher, what are you saying?" Biang Hong looked at him and said, "Planting roots deep in the fertile earth, not allowing it to see the world, not suffering the pain of the strong winds. Using the fire of the earth to purify it, it secretly gives birth to thunder and accumulates for a long time. When it breaks out of the earth, it will suddenly become a massive tree that soars to the heavens, its branches and leaves filled with sparks of lightning. Who can block its might?" Xian Yuan Po's gaze followed Biang Hong's to his right arm. His right arm was clearly shrunken, especially when compared to his thick and sturdy left arm. It was even more dazzling and wretched. Many of the customers in the tavern believed that this was a disability he had acquired after losing to Tian Haiyuer in the capital and had mocked him many times. Only he himself knew what kind of terrifying power was hidden in this seemingly crippled right arm. Of course, it had already been seen through. Only now did Xian Yuan realize that he was facing an expert of the divine domain, a legendary figure on the level of the storms of the 8 directions. His expression instantly turned serious as he asked, "What do you mean by deliberate?" Biang Hong explained, "Thunder is a natural law of the world. Concealment can only conceal its meaning, not its form. Just like a massive tree that soars to the heavens, once it breaks out of the earth, It will bring with it a myriad of stones and earth. Its momentum is astonishing, but it has lost its most important characteristic. Xian Yuan continued to ask, "May I ask what its characteristics are?" Bi Yanghong asked, "What is the external technique of the heavenly Thunderbringer?" Xian Yuan said without hesitation, "Fist." Bi Yanghong smiled. "I just happen to have some understanding of this field." In the great battle of the Mausoleum of Books, he had seen with his own eyes the Tianhai, Divine Empress's world-shaking punch, which had given him an enormous understanding. In the past few years, he had also begun to use his fists. As a result, in the world after Tianhai, no one's fists were stronger than his. Naturally, no one was more knowledgeable and profound in this aspect than him. Why didn't the Divine Empress use the wooden phoenix or the Rui scepter, instead using her fist to face us? Bi Yanghong looked into Xian Yuan Po's eyes and calmly said, "That's because the fist is a part of our body. It can rise and fall at will. Compared to external objects like swords and spears, it can at least rise and fall faster, and speed is power." Xian Yuan Po's eyes brightened. The demi-human race valued pure power even more than the human race or the demon race. As a member of the demi-human race, he was naturally no exception. But Bi Yanghong's words had not moved him because of this, but because they had faintly revealed a very important principle. Whether it was a Taoist technique, a sword technique, or an array, they all had to be used in battle. All techniques could not deviate from their roots, ultimately pointing towards speed and power. No matter how dazzling the picture, how imposing the momentum was, it was essentially the same. The concealed wind thunder truly could store up power to its maximum. But just as Bi Yanghong had said, it would affect the speed at which one attacked. How could one use these two aspects to their peak? Xian Yuan raised his question. Bi Yanghong began to explain, using the precious experience he had gained from his centuries of cultivation and countless battles. Xian Yuan Po's expression grew more and more focused, even forgetting to breathe. The room became abnormally quiet. The morning breeze passed through the cracks in the paper door, lightly ruffling the crystals and the 3 pagodas on the ground. If not for Wu Qiangbai's impatient snort, this lecture on the Tao might have continued for a very long time. Xian Yuan came to his senses, bowed to Bi Yanghong, and then left the room. He stood on the wooden planks in front of the room, watching the occasional smoke rising from the chimneys outside the courtyard in silence for a very long time. Bi Yanghong's words gradually fused with his years of bitter cultivation, allowing him to resolve many questions he had in his cultivation, even on the verge of touching upon a certain boundary. He took in a deep breath of the chilly air, then walked over the chilly white cobblestones to the wall. He used a small wooden ladle to pour some water into the short pine, then lowered his head to scoop up some of the chilly well water and forcefully washed his face. After confirming that his mind was completely awake, he wiped the water off his face and walked out of the courtyard. The war drums continued to beat from the upper city. The sound of the waves in the Red River was getting louder and louder, and they were getting closer and closer. The pine paths had already woken up. The neighbors were yawning, picking at the wax in their eyes, and holding pots, waiting in line to buy breakfast. A few laborers who had already finished their breakfast sat on the long benches outside the porridge store, their feet crossed as they chatted. It was like they could not hear the war drums coming from the upper city, nor could they hear the roaring waves of the nearby Red River. But this did not mean that they were not interested in the heavenly selection ceremony. Quite a few people were discussing which fighting platform they should go to after work. Xian Yuan walked through the street. A neighbor girl he knew asked him if he had eaten breakfast. He smiled and nodded. A laborer he knew asked him if the tavern's business had been bad recently, when the owner would be willing to sell a cup of coarse ale for 2 coins. He shook his head, indicating that he did not know. Then, the owner of the bun store casually asked him what he was going to do so early in the morning. He stopped and replied, "I'm going to participate in the heavenly selection ceremony." The street was quiet for a moment. Even the steam seeping out of the steaming pot in the store froze for a moment. A moment later, laughter rose up. It did not stop for a very long time, only getting louder and louder, carrying ridicule or amusement, kindness or malice. Xian Yuanpe rubbed the back of his head and gave a simple and honest laugh. The fighting platform Xian Yuanpe was in the pine paths, very close to his home. He could walk there instead of taking a carriage, saving him some money. By the time he reached the end of the street where the fighting platform was located, many people had already gathered to watch the spectacle, but not even 2 pages of the register had been filled. This place was very remote, far from the imperial city and Heaven's Guard Pavilion. No important personage would notice this place, and it was impossible for any formidable individual to appear here, so it naturally could not attract the experts who wanted to challenge him. Those who were willing to ascend the fighting platforms here were often ordinary demi-humans who had no intentions of participating in the heavenly selection ceremony and only wanted to rely on their brute courage to play around. Battles between ordinary people, naturally, could not be described as spectacular. It was often more like a brawl between hoodlums in the marketplace, hastily exchanging a few blows before stopping. The Car Tribe judge and 2 supervisors in charge of this fighting platform were already bored to the extreme. The officials in charge of the pine paths were even more bored. The minor official at the register table was already beginning to feel sleepy, his head drooping from time to time. At some point, it seemed like his head would crash against the edge of the table. Xian Yuanpe walked up to the table and lightly rapped on it. The minor official was startled out of his stupor and angrily raised his head. He wanted to reprimand him, but he froze. Chapter 954. He recognized Xian Yuanpe. Xian Yuanpe was also rather surprised because he recognized this minor official. Just a few days ago in a small wine shop, this minor official had gotten drunk and said many malicious words to him. Seeing Xian Yuanpe, the minor official was shocked and asked, "Brat, what are you doing here?" Xian Yuanpe pointed at the register on the table and said, "They said that I want to register my name here." The minor official froze for a moment before reacting. "You want to participate in the heavenly selection?" Xian Yuanpe replied, "Yes." The minor official broke into laughter and jeered. "A cripple like you wants to marry Her Highness the Princess?" Xian Yuanpe replied, "I've never thought about marrying Her Highness, but I want to participate in the heavenly selection." The minor official said with a disdainful expression, "It looks to me like you want to throw away your life." There were not many competitors on this platform, and Xian Yuanpe's tall and sturdy body had already attracted the attention of a few people. Hearing the minor official's laughter and jeering, even more people looked over. The pine paths had always been a small place, so it was very easy to run into familiar people. There were a few customers in the crowd who frequented the small wine shop. When they saw this scene, they hurriedly walked over. When they realized why Xian Yuanpe had come, they were very shocked and urged him to quickly give up on this idea. "I say, are you crazy? This isn't a joke. Didn't you hear that the Taoist Church of the Western Waste didn't send a single priest this time? The fighting platform on the upper city wall has the medical officials from the imperial court and the council of elders watching over it. But what if you get injured here? There's no one to treat you, and if you bleed profusely, you really might die. Even if you're usually ridiculed by others, why take such a risk just to prove yourself?" Xian Yuanpe remained silent, not responding to these concerns. Seeing this, the customers in the wine shop also said nothing more. The minor official jeered, "If you insist on throwing away your life, that's up to you. But when the time comes, don't cry too unsightly on the platform." Xian Yuanpe took up an ink brush and wrote down his name and relevant information on the register. He then tied a strip of cloth around his right wrist. Time slowly passed, and it was finally his turn to walk onto the platform. The crowd around the platform began to inquire about his background. A gambling den steward thought of the previous scene and squeezed his way to the table to ask the official, "Do we need to pay attention?" The minor official sneered. "He's just a dishwasher, bragging that he once went to the capital. He thinks he's some great person." One of the customers who tried to stop Xian Yuanpe said, "He did go to the capital." The minor official was very angry after being refuted. His face turned red and he shouted, "So what? Even if he used to be awe-inspiring, he's nothing but trash now." The cool morning breeze blew away the smoke and steam from the pine paths, and it also ruffled the bandages on the participants' wrists. Xian Yuan Po was tall and sturdy, but his opponent was even taller. The tall and sturdy middle-aged man glanced at Xian Yuan Po's shriveled right arm, and a look of disdain appeared in his eyes as he said, "I sympathize with you for encountering me from the start." After saying this, accompanied by a wave of extremely clear cracking sounds, his body became even taller, like a small mountain, casting a shadow on the arena. The crowd around the platform was stunned by this sight, thinking, why has a member of the Xiang clan come here? In every generation, the Xiang clan was one of the top 3 major races of the demi-human race. Even the most ordinary member of its clan possessed unimaginable divine strength. Logically speaking, a descendant of such a major clan should have gone to the fighting platforms near the Imperial Palace or Heaven's Guard Pavilion. Why had he come to a small place like the Pine Paths? The Carp tribe steward in charge of judging the outcome of the fighting platform narrowed his eyes, quickly understanding the reason. The supervisor from the Council of Elders had his eyes closed as if he was sleeping. It was obvious that he had already known of this matter. The demi-human court official sensed the powerful qi exuded by this Xiang clan descendant and slightly raised his brows. He thought, with this sort of strength and the secret techniques of the Xiang clan, if he were to train for 2 years, he would probably have the right to become a Red River Beast Guard. For him to come to the Pine Paths to participate in the competition today, it seems like he was planning something big. As he thought of this, the demi-human court official looked at Xian Yuan Po with a complicated gaze. He had not heard the argument that had taken place below the platform, so he didn't know where this composed bear youth had come from. He only felt that this boy had clearly lost an arm, but he had still come to participate in the heavenly selection. His courage was truly praiseworthy, but alas, he had encountered an opponent he could not defeat at the very start. It was truly a pity. Xian Yuan Po did not know what the demi-human court official was thinking, but even if he did, he would not care. Just like how he would not care if he heard his opponent's words. It was still early in the morning, and this was only the first match of the fighting platform. If he wanted to reach the Imperial Palace, he would still need a very long time, and he would still need to fight many matches. Just like how he had chosen the fighting platform of the Pine Paths, he needed to save time. Therefore, he did not say anything to his opponent, nor did he quietly wait for his opponent to make a move like a true expert. Instead, he directly walked towards his opponent. His footsteps seemed to be a little hurried, which made him look a little panicked to the onlookers. The contempt in the Xiang clan descendants' eyes intensified. Xian Yuan raised his fist and punched forward. His right arm was very withered, the sleeve flapping in the wind. He had punched with his left fist. There was nothing special about his fist. It was straight and unremarkable, and the angle at which it was punched was also very ordinary. There was no technique to speak of, just a random punch. The Xiang clan descendant had not expected him to attack without any warning. A hint of anger flashed through his eyes as he gave a shout and also punched. The Xiang clan descendant was as tall and sturdy as a mountain, and his fist was also enormous. It was like a massive boulder falling from a summit. The massive fist howled through the air, stirring up a fierce gale. Shards of starlight could be faintly seen within it, and its momentum was rather astonishing. In comparison, Xian Yuan Po's fist was very ordinary, devoid of any power to speak of. The two fists got closer and closer, about to meet, and the contrast between them became even more striking. The Xiang clan descendant's massive fist made Xian Yuan Po's fist seem very pitiful. Some of the spectators thought of the gruesome sight that was about to occur and couldn't bear to watch, so they turned their heads away. Xian Yuan Po did not turn his head, did not even blink. He was still as composed, or perhaps wouldn't. Had he been scared silly by the energy of his opponent's fist, or was he so stupid that he couldn't even react? This was what some of the spectators below the stage thought. The minor official stood up from behind his table and stared at the scene on the stage, his eyes filled with malice and hope. The official of the demi-human court had been watching the battle this entire time. He was very sure that Xian Yuan Po was not scared silly, nor was he unable to react, because Xian Yuan Po's breathing was not disordered. So he could not understand why Xianyuan did nothing but continue to punch, even though he was clearly no match for his opponent in strength. If it was not because of absolute confidence, then was it because of pride and dignity? As the official thought this, he suddenly felt a little admiration for Xianyuan's courage. Under the gazes that were filled with malice, cruelty, pity, Xianyuan's fist and the Xiang clan descendants' fist finally met. From the outside, the difference between the two fists was enormous. When their fists met, it looked like a pebble had landed on a boulder. If one considered the difference in strength between the two fists, it was like an egg crashing into a boulder. A light crack came from the stage. There was a cracking sound, and it really sounded like an egg breaking. Shockingly, Xianyuan's fist did not shatter, nor was it sent flying into the air like a pebble. His fist was tightly pressed against the Xiang clan descendant's fist. His fist seemed so small, yet it was so steady. Countless soft sounds followed, and then gradually became clear and deafening. Crack, crack. It was just like that cliff from yesterday. There was a loud bang. It was like that cliff had fallen into the Red River, stirring up countless massive waves. Waves of chi exploded over the stage, transforming into fierce gales that howled and stirred up countless clouds of dust. A hint of extreme fear appeared in the Xiang clan descendant's eyes as he howled in pain and despair. The howling gales suddenly vanished, leaving only a little wind swirling over the stage, causing Xianyuan's somewhat empty sleeve to fall upon the Xiang clan descendant's body. His burly body, which was like a small mountain, gradually became shorter in this seemingly gentle wind, and then collapsed. The Xiang clan descendant sat paralyzed on the stage, his right arm powerlessly hanging by his side, blood seeping out from his sleeve. The light pa sound and the subsequent ka-ka sound were the sounds of something breaking. When his fist met Xianyuan's, the first to make contact was his finger. Thus, his finger bone broke. Next, his wrist bone broke. Next, his arm bone broke. In the end, even his shoulder bone was broken. His face was abnormally pale, his eyes filled with fear. His body was soaked, but it was impossible to tell whether it was sweat, blood, or something else. Xianyuan drew back his fist, no longer attacking. At this sight, the Xiang clan descendant knew that he had survived. The fear in his eyes turned into confusion, and then they gradually dissipated. In the level of strength that he was most proud of, he had been utterly defeated. He couldn't even think of revenge, because the strength Xianyuan had displayed was too powerful, inconceivably powerful. This unimaginable disparity crushed his body, his will to fight, and even his mind. He began to vomit, throwing up all the breakfast he had eaten onto the stage. An unpleasant odor gradually began to spread. Whether it was the Carp clan deacon standing on the stage or the two supervising officials, none of them seemed to have smelled it. The ordinary officials around the stage and the spectators were even more dumbfounded. Just who was this bare youth? How could that seemingly ordinary fist possess such terrifying strength? Chapter 955. Under countless shocked gazes, Xianyuan walked down from the fighting platform and walked up to the small table. He looked at the minor official and asked, "May I ask how long the next round will take?" The minor official recalled the scene on the fighting platform and subconsciously lowered his gaze, apparently wanting to avoid meeting Xianyuan's gaze. However, he saw Xianyuan's fist, that seemingly ordinary yet terrifying fist. The minor official paled as he used his trembling hands to flip through the list. After a very long time, he finally said, "There are still 7 more matches." His voice trembled slightly, but it was unknown whether it was because of fear or something else. Xianyuan did not notice these details. Thinking about how long 7 matches would take, he walked out of the crowd. Many curious gazes fell on him, thinking he's just won this match, so where is he going now? The minor official somewhat calmed down, but when he thought about his loss of composure, his shame turned to anger, and an unnatural flush appeared on his pale face. Suddenly, there was a hubbub as countless gazes turned to the fighting platform. The winner of this battle was a skinny middle-aged man with an indifferent expression. He held a chilling iron saber in his hand. The minor official was flabbergasted at the sight of this middle-aged man, thinking, why has this vicious person also come to the pine paths to fight? He suddenly thought of a possibility and quickly flipped through the list of matches, confirming that this thin man would be Xian Yuan Po's next opponent. He finally relaxed, at the same time feeling very comfortable. As he gazed at Xian Yuan Po on the distant street, he viciously thought, even if you really do have some brute strength, so what? You'll just be staying for one more round. In a little while, you'll still end up being hacked to death. The Heavenly Selection Ceremony was a grand occasion for the demi-human race, and the remote Pine Paths fighting platform was also very lively. The matches that had been thought to be unremarkable had also been filled with twists and turns. The 7 matches after Xian Yuan Po's victory had all been fought by true experts, making for an abnormally marvelous spectacle. The poor people of the Pine Paths did not understand what was going on, but the Car Tribe administrator and the officials of the demi-human court and the Council of Elders had long since guessed at the true reason. Many experts of the demi-human race did not have the extravagant hope of obtaining the final victory in the Heavenly Selection Ceremony and becoming Princess Lolawa's husband, but they still wanted to do their utmost to enter the top ranks of the Heavenly Selection Ceremony and win glory for themselves and their tribes. If they could ultimately obtain the right to enter the Celestial Tree and receive the baptism of the wildfire, that would be for the best. These experts were well aware that if they went to the fighting arenas near the Imperial Palace or Heaven's Guard Pavilion, it would be very difficult for them to last until the end. Thus, they had deliberately chosen the most remote fighting arena, the Pine Paths. They wanted to avoid those opponents of the same cultivation level, or even stronger, so that they could last as long as possible and go as far as possible. It now appeared that there were quite a few experts with this idea, like the Xiang clan descendant defeated by Xian Yuan Po, or the 10-some formidable individuals who had appeared later on. But compared to the fighting arenas near the Imperial Palace and Heaven's Guard Pavilion, the difficulty of this place was still much lower. As these experts took the stage, the matches grew more and more intense. After the final 7 matches, the crystals responsible for maintaining the defensive arrays of the fighting arenas needed to be replaced. From this, one could imagine how intense these matches had been, especially with the appearance of 2 extremely famous demi-human experts. The crowd grew more and more excited, cries of surprise rising from all around the fighting arenas. The shock brought about by Xian Yuan Po's first match had greatly subsided, but the official of the demi-human court and a few commoners would still occasionally glance at the outer edge of the crowd, see the leather bag Xian Yuan Po carried, and speculate in confusion as to what was inside. Noiselessly, the red sun had already risen over the peaks of the mountains on the opposite shore and shone on the surface of the river. The last of the morning mist over White Emperor City had already dispersed, and the first round of matches had basically ended in the various fighting arenas. It was the same on the Pine Paths, and it was soon Xian Yuan Po's turn to step onto the stage. Seeing Xian Yuan Po's figure, the spectators around the ring recalled the mountain-like fist from before and immediately cheered. Some of the neighbors and coolies who knew him daily even cheered loudly for him. However, when Xian Yuan Po's opponent also appeared on the ring, the cheers and cheers quickly died down. Xian Yuan Po's opponent was a thin, middle-aged man, precisely the one who had followed him onto the stage in the first round. Seeing this thin, middle-aged man, the crowd around the stage appeared rather fearful. A cold smile appeared on the face of the minor official behind the table. Even the Carp Tribe steward and the 2 officials from the demi-human court and the Council of Elders couldn't help but shake their heads, their emotions rather complex. This thin, middle-aged man was from the Nirvana race and was called Niechi. He was a true demi-human expert and had a great reputation on the 2 shores of the Red River. His true essence was extremely vigorous, and his blade technique was extremely cruel. Just like his personality, very few opponents who had been defeated by his blade had ever survived. In the first round of matches, his opponent had been beheaded by a single strike of his blade. The supervising official of the demi-human court had not even been able to stop him in time. This demi-human expert's blade technique was incredibly fast, like a bolt of lightning. It was said that he had once told a companion that although his cultivation in the path of the blade was far inferior to Wang Po's, in terms of pure speed, not even Wang Po's blade was as fast as his. Your strength truly isn't bad, but it's far from enough, Nietzsche expressionlessly said to Xian Yuan Pe, because you're too slow. These seemingly ordinary words were actually extremely tyrannical, and they truly were very reasonable. No matter how strong one's strength was, if one could not keep up with their opponent's speed, how could one injure them? Xian Yuan Pe fell silent at these words. He was not feeling uneasy or lacking in confidence, but he was recalling the words that Yang Hong had said to him before he left the courtyard. Speed was strength. How should he understand these words? Speed, in essence, was a method of using strength. True experts were not those who possessed limitless strength but did not know how to use it. How could one convert strength into speed? If he had some time to properly comprehend Yang Hong's words, perhaps there was no perhaps. There was no time. An extremely bright and also extremely cold ray of light suddenly appeared in Xian Yuan Pe's black eyes. It was a blade glow. Although his words were rather disdainful, Nietzsche was still fearful of Xian Yuan Pe's strength, so he did not give Xian Yuan Pe any time to prepare. He wanted to use his fastest blade to cut off Xian Yuan Pe's head. This blade truly was fast as a galloping horse, as fast as a bolt of lightning. Only when the blade glow transformed into a ray of light and unfurled in Xian Yuan Pe's eyes did the sound of a blade being unsheathed. With a clear sound, the sharp and cold iron blade pierced through the air. By the time the crowd around the platform heard this sound, the blade was only half a foot from Xian Yuan Pe's neck. Chapter 956. There was no time for the wind to swirl, no time for the crowd to blink, and no time for cries of alarm. The blade was already in front of Xian Yuan Pe. Just when his neck was about to be severed, his head about to fall off. The official of the demi-human court had been prepared, but he realized that Nietzsche's blade was even faster than he had predicted. He was still too late to stop it. The minor official behind the table had also been prepared, but he still found it hard to suppress the joy in his heart. But he did not have time to smile. It was a very brief moment of time, so brief that not even sound could travel. The arena was silent, brimming with fear. In the end, what broke the silence and allowed time to flow back to normal was an incredibly clear sound. It was not the swish of a blade, nor was it the sound of a head falling to the ground. It was a thud. It was like a ripe fruit smashing into the hard ground, smashing into pulp. It was like a leather bag filled with wine being sat on by the Xiang clan leader. It was more like a fist smashing heavily into the muddy ground. Yes, this sound was the most similar because this was what had truly happened. Nietzsche's blade was as fast as a lightning bolt, but Xian Yuan Pe's fist was even faster. His fist was so fast that no one could see it, not even leaving a blur. When a blade was still half a foot from his neck, his fist had already smashed into Nietzsche's face. An unimaginably massive force followed the fist and descended. Nietzsche's face began to deform. The bridge of his nose caved in, his eye sockets split open, and his lower jaw ripped apart. Countless streams of blood bloomed like petals, spreading in all directions. Under Xian Yuan Pe's fist, his face looked like a puddle of mud. His neck broke almost at the same time, and his head flipped backwards, hanging on his back. It looked like a heavy red fruit hanging from a branch. This scene looked a little strange and extremely terrifying. As expected of an expert of the demon race who had been famous for a long time, Nietzsche did not die immediately. His cracked throat emitted an indecipherable sound, swaying several times on the arena before finally falling to the ground, accompanied by the splashing of the extremely unpleasant-looking and smelling juices. He died. All around the arena, there was a deathly stillness. The Carp tribe administrator looked at Xian Yuan Pe, a dazed expression on his face. The people who didn't have the time to cry out were stunned and forgot to cry out. Just as the minor official was about to celebrate Xian Yuan Pe's death, a smile finally appeared on his face, but it was even uglier than crying. Xian Yuan Pe looked at his own fist, slightly stunned. Then he looked at Nietzsche's body and shook his head, saying, "You're too fast." In participating in the heavenly selection ceremony today, He had no intention of killing anyone. It was just that the opponent's saber was too fast, and the killing intent was too fierce. How to turn strength into speed. How could he maximize his speed? Byung Hong had said that there was no need to be too deliberate. It rose as one wished. Follow your heart's desire. Although there was no formal ceremony, Xin Yuanpa had once taken Luo Luo as his master, and Luo Luo was Chun Changsheng's only female student. From this point of view, he was originally from the old temple of Xining village. Moreover, he was a student of the Tradition Academy and had lived with Chun Changsheng for a long time. Whether it was following one's heart or following one's heart, it was all about cultivating one's heart, and the heart was the only Tao technique that could not be cultivated in this world. He was not being sarcastic when he said that his opponent's saber was too fast, but he was telling the truth. The saber was so fast that he had no time to think, no time to think. He could only move based on instinct. There was no need to think. Only this was truly following one's heart. Xin Yuanpa walked down from the fighting platform. The crowd parted like a tide. The demi-human court official gazed at Xin Yuanpa's figure and slightly arched his brows. He summoned his subordinate and ordered him to investigate Xin Yuanpa's background. In the first match, Xin Yuanpa had relied on his strength to stun that Xiang clan descendant, which had already shocked him and the official from the Council of Elders. But that shock was definitely not as intense as the shock he felt from this match, because Niechi was a true demi-human expert. When the demi-human court official saw Niechi's lightning-fast attack, he was even more certain that not even he was a match for Niechi, yet Niechi had been defeated by this bare youth's fist. If Niechi was a true powerhouse, then what could this bare youth be considered? Xin Yuanpa walked up to the small table. This was the third time he had come to this small table today. The official he recognized had also changed his complexion many times. At the start, the minor official's face had been brimming with disdain and ridicule, followed by shock and avoidance, and then humiliation and hatred. Now, the minor official's face was extremely pale, as if he had caught a cold, but he was also sweating profusely. Especially when Xin Yuanpa stood in front of the table and cast a shadow on his body, he began to sweat even more profusely, instantly drenching his clothes. An official watched from the side and worriedly asked, "Chao Si, are you all right?" Only now did Xin Yuanpa learn the minor official's name. The minor official mumbled a few words of assent, then raised his sleeve to wipe away his sweat, but how could he possibly wipe it clean? Xin Yuanpa knew why he was doing this, but he did not care. After confirming his name, he left. The minor official raised his head and gazed at Xin Yuanpa's back. He couldn't help but recall the words he had said in the small tavern 2 days ago. At the time, he had drunk a great deal of wine and had originally forgotten many things, but after suffering so many fright today, he had long ago recalled all those words. Isn't he just a piece of trash? A piece of trash like this is bragging. And you guys actually believe it? And an expert of the Tianhai clan. You might as well say it's Tianhai Sheng Shui. Bear cub, stop right there. Look at his hand. This is a piece of trash without any strength, only fit to wash dishes. And you call yourself a manager of the Tradition Academy? That's the Tradition Academy. If you had that kind of ability, would you still be here washing dishes? Thinking about how he had cursed at this person so many times that day, his sweat flowed even faster. When he remembered that he had even spat in front of this person that day, he felt a wave of dizziness and was about to faint. Xin Yuanpa walked out of the crowd and came to the corner of the street. He took out a beef bun from a paper bag and began to eat. After the first match, he found that fighting really did take a lot of energy, so he went to the bun store and bought the last tray of beef buns. As expected, he had only thrown 2 punches and already felt extremely hungry. The bun was already cold and the gravy was slightly congealed. It wasn't very tasty, but he ate very attentively. The crowd also watched very attentively. On the stage, there was still a fierce battle going on, but no one was paying attention. Everyone's gazes were on the street outside, on Xin Yuanpa's body, and on his hand. It was as if the meat bun in his hand was the most delicious thing in the world. Chapter 9:57. The process of the heavenly selection ceremony truly was very simple and fast. As the matches progressed, only half of the participants would be left in each round, so the process grew faster and faster. It was still early, but the majority of the process was already over half done. Many of the fighting platforms had already decided on the final victors and were now engaged in fierce battles according to the zones. The fighting platforms near the Imperial Palace and Heaven Guard Pavilion had long since chosen their final candidates, as no one dared to challenge them. Xiaoda, the great Western Continent's second prince, and the mysterious young man in the bamboo hat stood at their respective places. The demi-human populace looked at those seemingly lonely but actually proud figures on the fighting platforms, their eyes brimming with reverence and worship. The most eye-catching was still Xiaoda. This supreme expert of the senior generation of the demi-human race had displayed far too frightening a fighting strength. Whether it was the vice commander of the Red River Beast Guard or the demi-human generals, none of them could last more than a few exchanges against him. This had always been a matter of course. With Wang Pe entering the divine domain and Xiao Zhang being wanted by the Great Zhou Imperial Court, Xiaoda was now ranked second on the Proclamation of Liberation. The experts of the continent of the divine domain naturally would not participate in the heavenly selection ceremony. The secluded elders of the sects of the south would also not shamelessly ask to marry Princess Luluo. So unless Liang Wangsun personally came or one of the top-ranked divine generals of the Great Zhou came, who could be a match for him? It was just as the vast majority of the ordinary people of White Emperor City thought. In the end, the one who could marry Princess Luluo, endure the baptism of the wildfire, and become the next White Emperor naturally had to be Xiaoda. Xiaoda knew more secrets than the ordinary people, but he also thought the same. This was a self-confidence that an expert of the continent had to possess. More importantly, no matter what the empress thought, no matter what sort of political struggles were hidden behind the heavenly selection ceremony, since he had to act according to the rules of his ancestors, he could not lose because no one could defeat him. He calmly stood on the fighting platform, feeling the gazes from all around him. He was not intoxicated, nor was he impatient. The figures on the other fighting platforms were similarly calm. Whether it was the young man in the bamboo hat, the second prince of the great Western continent, or the demi-human experts, they were all truly important figures. They were already used to being the focus of the populace. They only needed to calmly wait for the final few participants to appear. As for whether the participants would affect them in any way, they didn't care at all. After experiencing so many battles, those who were able to kill their way out were definitely not simple. What kind of extraordinary people could appear in those remote and poor streets? How could they threaten them? At this moment, some people shifted their gazes downward, revealing curious expressions. The Imperial Palace and Heaven's Guard Pavilion were both high up. If one wanted to get there, they would have to take a detour along the slope or go up the stairway to heaven in the center of the city. A heavy sound came from the bottom of the stairway. It sounded like a war drum. The crowd knew that these were probably not war drums, as it was still far from dusk, not yet the end of the heavenly selection ceremony. Then what was that sound? Why was it so heavy, yet also made one feel excited? It even seemed like the wildfire's aura had become stronger. The surface of the water around Heaven's Guard Pavilion suddenly began to ripple. The young man in the bamboo hat quietly watched, perhaps seeing something. The second prince of the great Western continent looked at the dust rising from the bricks in front of the imperial city and slightly raised his brows, seemingly thinking of something. Xiaoda looked in the direction of the stairway to heaven, his expression chilling as if he had sensed something. Experts like them had naturally realized long ago that the sound coming from below was not the sound of war drums, but footsteps. The question was, how many people were walking at the same time for the tremors to cause ripples in the water around Heaven's Guard Pavilion and dust to rise from the bricks in front of the imperial city? And just how orderly were the footsteps of these people, so that they did not appear the slightest bit disorderly, but instead echoed like war drums? More and more gazes were directed down below. Gradually, those gazes that had once been filled with respect or adoration for Xiaoda, and the great Western continent's second prince turned to shock. Many people appeared on the stairway to heaven, dressed in simple and unadorned clothes. Some of their clothes were even somewhat tattered and exuded a foul stench. They clearly came from the lower city, perhaps even from the riverside region. If the luxuriously dressed denizens of the upper city had seen the tattered clothes of these poor people, they would definitely have laughed at them. If those noble ladies with their many fragrant sachets smelled the stench of sweat from these poor people, they would assuredly cover their mouths and noses, a look of disdain on their faces. But they did not do this today, because there were far too many of these poor people. The stairway to heaven was completely dark, and it was impossible to count how many people there were. This made them subconsciously feel fear. The people walked silently, looking like a tide, quickly drowning the stairway to heaven and then flowing towards the front of the imperial city. The officials responsible for maintaining order naturally associated this with a popular uprising, and their expressions suddenly changed. But then they realized that this was not the case. Although one could see fervor on the faces of these poor people from the lower city, there was no madness, only reverence and yearning. Did these people want to take advantage of the heavenly selection ceremony to come to the imperial city that they normally could not set foot in to watch the spectacle? That was not right, because they were very silent, and there was no cowering or unease on their faces that was commonly seen on the faces of the poor. On the contrary, they seemed particularly proud. Crucially, these poor people did not even glance at the majestic imperial city. They only looked forward. Many important personages of the demi-human race frowned at this sight, including Madame Mu, who was seated at the highest stone hall. A minister of the demi-human court sternly asked, "Just what is going on here?" When the crowd left the lower city, officials had already gone to investigate and quickly determine the reason. An official whispered, "It's said that they're following a candidate." The minister was surprised. What sort of person could a place like the lower city have? Even if they did, why would so many people be following them? It was very normal for the people to follow the victorious candidate to the imperial city to watch the spectacle. But what was unusual today was that there were too many people from the lower city who came with the candidate. And the mood of these people was somewhat different from usual. The poor people from the lower city did not look at the imperial city, did not look at Heavengard Pavilion, only forward. There was a person in front of them. It was a very ordinary-looking bear youth with a calm expression that was almost wooden. That bear youth wore simple and clean clothes. His appearance was ordinary, and there was nothing special about him. But many important personages of the demi-human race had already noticed that the crowd from the lower city had intentionally kept a certain distance from the bear youth. If the people of the lower city were a tide, the bear youth was a reef, and all the water retreated in fear. This distance perhaps signified reverence. The eyes of the people of the lower city, gazed at the bear youth, were brimming with reverence. Besides reverence, there was also fanaticism and a tinge of confusion. It was like they had received too many shocks and had still not completely woken up. Just what had happened. Chapter 958. His opponent in the first match was a descendant of the Xiong clan. The two clashed in pure strength, and the Xiong clan descendant lost. On the high observation platform of the Imperial City, the Car Tribe judge in charge of deciding the outcome of the matches bowed. The observation platform was empty. The members of the Council of Elders and the high-ranking officials of the demi-human court were all in the gloomy stone hall, pensively reading the files that had just been delivered. Upon hearing the Carp Tribe judge's words, many gazes turned to the mountainous figure at the very top. The chief elder was also the leader of the Xiong clan. Why had a descendant of the Xiong clan gone to a place like the Pine Paths to participate, and he had still lost? The chief elder's eyes were still closed, as if he was asleep. He showed no reaction. The important figures in the hall shook their heads and returned their gazes to the files. A high-ranking official of the demi-human court suddenly changed his expression and said his opponent in the second match was actually Nietzsche. Whispers of discussion rose from the stone hall, all of them clearly shocked. To these important figures of the demi-human race, Nietzsche was naturally nothing, but he was still a famous expert. If it really was him, How could he have lost? Nietzsche was directly killed because his blade was not as fast as his opponent's fist. The Car Tribe judge paid no attention to the cries of shock coming from the stone hall. With his head lowered, he continued. The third match was fought by Han Xiaodao. A shocked voice came from the stone hall. Wait, are you speaking of the Han Xiaodao that we all know? The Car Tribe judge's voice trembled as he replied, Yes, and then he was also defeated. Someone anxiously asked, What happened next? The Car Tribe judge fell quiet for a while, as if the mental impact of the events that had taken place had still not completely dissipated. The fourth match was fought by Wu Yu. He was also defeated. Wu Yu? The person asked in shock. You're not mistaken, right? How could he also be defeated? At this moment, an official looked at the resounding names that appeared one after another at the end of the dossier. He frowned slightly and asked, Wait a moment, I don't understand. Why would there be so many experts appearing in such a remote lower city arena? The Car Tribe judge lowered his head even more, not answering this question. Not a single colleague or member of the Council of Elders in the Stone Hall answered his question. There was a hint of awkwardness in their silence. Many of the important figures in the Stone Hall knew the answer to this question because they had arranged this beforehand. Other than powerful individuals like Xiaoda, the tribal leaders and officials of the demi-human court did not have any extravagant hopes that the participants of their tribes would obtain the final victory in the heavenly selection ceremony and marry the princess. They only wanted to use this opportunity to have the young experts of their tribes enter the front ranks and obtain the right to enter the celestial tree. As long as they could receive the baptism of the wildfire and the blessings of the ancestral spirits, they would be able to greatly increase their strength, even break through in a short period of time. Because of this reason, these big figures had arranged for the young experts in their own tribes who had great potential but were not particularly eye-catching to be sent to the lower city district, which received very little attention. They hoped that they could avoid more powerful enemies and fight for one of the three places. This way of thinking was very reasonable. Even though there were many tribes with this idea, and in a sense, they had still clashed with each other in advance, the competition in the lower city was still much easier than in the imperial city and the vicinity of Heaven's Guard Pavilion. However, no one expected the final result to be like this. The young warriors, whom all the clans had high hopes for, had all been defeated. They had all been defeated by a very ordinary-looking bear youth. An elder suddenly sternly asked, Even if this child miraculously won 6 matches in a row and represented the Pine Paths in winning the selection of the Sanshan district and obtaining a spot, why did only he come? Didn't the lower city district have 3 spots? What about the other 2? He was the leader of the deer tribe. Today, he had secretly placed his most beloved illegitimate child in the southern village, hoping to fish in troubled waters and obtain a chance for his illegitimate child to enter the celestial tree tomorrow. Yet he had clearly received news that his illegitimate child had won. So why had he not appeared? That fellow represented the Pine Paths in the selection, and after obtaining a spot in the Sanshan district, he went to Star River Bay in the southern village. The Carp Tribe administrator recalled the scene he had seen and couldn't help but sigh. He also took those 2 spots. The stone hall was quiet for a few moments, clearly out of shock and confusion. A few moments later, the deer tribe leader angrily roared. Just what does this idiot want to do? Isn't taking 1 spot enough? Does he not know that the spot cannot be transferred? This was something that many elders and officials could not understand. Since he had already obtained a spot in the Sanshan district, he could enter the celestial tree tomorrow to be baptized by the wildfire. So why did that fellow refuse to give up and run off to Star River Bay to fight 2 more matches with the southern village? Although the rules of the heavenly selection ceremony did not forbid this, although that fellow was truly very strong, a truly powerful opponent had yet to appear. Besides consuming true essence and energy, what meaning was there in this? I don't know. The Carp Tribe administrator recalled the words that fellow had said when he walked onto the fighting platform and hesitantly said, It seems to be because he doesn't like other people participating in the heavenly selection ceremony. As long as it is a participant, he will knock them down. What sort of reason was this? It was simply incomprehensible. Suddenly, a cold voice said, "I don't understand. How did he win?" It was not that he truly didn't understand, but that he didn't believe, that he had doubts. It was obvious that many important personages of the demi-human race, including this official, felt that this matter was far too strange and began to feel many doubts. The Carp Tribe administrator was thinking of something else, his mind a little dazed as he said, he used his fist. Fist? Yes, whether it was against Niet Shi, Han Xiao Dao, or any other expert, he only used one fist. One fist? Yes. Each time he went on stage, he only used one fist, and then his opponent would fall. The stone hall was quiet for a very long time, with not a single sound coming from it. The twilight was not deep and the sun was still setting, but the wind was rather chilly. The Carp Tribe administrator stood on the observation platform, his clothes fluttering in the wind. In the setting sun, he looked like a blazing banner. From dawn to dusk, countless matches had been held on the fighting platforms of the heavenly selection ceremony. But it was obvious that the most important matches today were the 9 matches taking place in the lower city. In these 9 matches, that fellow had used a total of 9 punches. 1 punch for each match. 1 punch to defeat his opponent. What sort of concept was this? What sort of sight was this? The important personages all had slightly chilled expressions, but they remained silent. Yes, no matter how graceful and daring he was, no matter how much of a ruckus he could cause, it was not enough for the impoverished populace of the lower city to silently and orderly follow him, gazing at him with eyes filled with fervor and respect. The problem was that this fellow was not an expert sent by the tribes. He was a true citizen of the lower city. The dossier clearly stated that he had lived in the lower city for many years. He had worked as a laborer, painted, and was even washing dishes in a small tavern. The important personages in the hall were extremely distant from the lower levels, but they were keenly aware of what this meant and how dangerous it was. Just who is this fellow? His name seems rather familiar. As these words broke the silence, countless gazes turned to a certain place in the hall. In that corner was a stalwart figure, but just like the Xiong clan leader, he had been very quiet the entire time, as if he was sleeping. But at this moment, neither the elders nor the high officials of the demi-human court would allow him to continue pretending to sleep, because he was the leader of the Bear Tribe. The Bear Tribe leader slowly said, "Don't look at me. I did not arrange this, nor do I have the right to arrange this. As for who he is, all of you should know. If all of you have forgotten even his name, what right do you have to sit here?" In a very short amount of time, the events of today's lower city spread. The luxuriously dressed denizens of the upper city looked at this figure with reverence and fear in their eyes. Those beautiful and delicate noble ladies looked at this figure with much more passion in their eyes. The other 6 participants who had also obtained the right to enter the celestial tree all looked at this figure with different emotions. Some of their eyes were brimming with apprehension, while others were brimming with killing intent. The gaze of the great Western continent's second prince slightly froze, his thoughts inscrutable. The young man in the bamboo hat looked in the direction of the imperial city, his thoughts inscrutable. Xiaoda calmly gazed at this figure, thinking about the specific battle report he had just received. He was sure that he had never seen this Bear Tribe youth before. But why did this person give him a familiar feeling? The several thousand denizens of the lower city stopped in front of the plaza of the imperial city like a tide. There was a large space at the very front of the crowd, allowing that reef-like figure to stand out even more clearly. The important figures on the observation platform said nothing. Even higher up, the Empress said nothing. This was tacit approval. The high official in charge of the heavenly selection ceremony asked, "What tribe are you from? State your name." The names of all the participants were written on the scroll. Registering one's name was just a traditional custom of verifying one's true identity, but indicating one's tribe was a form of glory. It was very quiet in front of the imperial city. Countless gazes looked over, wanting to know the answer. The Bear Tribe. But today, I am not representing my tribe in this battle. The light of dusk shone on his face like the light reflected off the surface of a lake. The great banyan tree was on the opposite side of the lake, while the kitchen was on this side. He squinted his eyes, perhaps because of the piercing light or because he was smiling foolishly. Orthodox Academy, Xianyuan. Chapter 9:59. It was very quiet in front of the imperial city. The conversation between the official and Xianyuan was clearly heard by everyone. The Orthodox Academy? Xianyuan. It was still quiet, but the silence didn't last for too long before it was broken by whispers. Then the whispers grew louder and louder, and gradually became noisy. There were even many exclamations of surprise mixed in, and in the end, it became a roaring tide. The crowd recalled a rumor from many years ago. It was said that a talented bear youth had gone to the human capital 80,000 li away and successfully entered one of the 6 Ivies, Star Caesar Academy. However, he was beaten into a cripple by a young master of the Tianhai clan. Instead, it was a blessing in disguise, and he entered the Orthodox Academy. It was even said that he had become Princess Lualaa's student. In those 2 years, this rather legendary story was the talk of many people after their meals. That bear youth was the object of envy for many demi-human youths, but as time passed and the situation changed, especially the final conclusion, this story and that bear youth were gradually forgotten. Occasionally, when someone recalled this rumor, they would just shake their head and sigh. Until today, when the heavenly selection ceremony, when the people of the lower city surged to the imperial city like a tide, he stood at the very front like a reef, attracting everyone's gazes and telling everyone that he was that bear youth from the past, that he still represented the Orthodox Academy. The entire crowd was in an uproar. Countless gazes fell on Xianyuan, wanting to see just what the main character of this rumor looked like, wanting even more to know why he had suddenly disappeared in the last few years. If the rumor was true, hadn't he escaped from the Orthodox Academy? Why had he come to battle today as a representative of the Orthodox Academy? If the Pope were to learn of this matter, what sort of problems would arise? There was a slight disturbance around the imperial city as several dozen priests walked in from outside. Some of these priests were demi-humans, while others were humans. Most of them wore black robes, a few wore blue Taoist robes, and one wore a red divine robe. It was actually an archbishop. Seeing these indifferent and dignified priests, many people subconsciously lowered their heads and bowed, then made way. Starting from a few days ago, the gate of the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes had been tightly shut. Everyone in White Emperor City understood why, and they had even heard that the archbishop had torn up the invitations to the banquet to welcome the princes of the great Western continent. Why had these priests, including the archbishop, suddenly appeared in front of the imperial city? The archbishop led dozens of priests towards Xianyuan. Looking at this scene and thinking about the ending of the rumor, the people became nervous, but also excited to watch a good show. What happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. The archbishop didn't do anything. He walked directly to Xianyuan's side and then stood there silently. Dozens of priests spread out, separating Xianyuan from the crowd, especially from the Red River Beast Garden officials, clearly assuming a protective stance. Following that, there was another commotion outside the imperial city. A few stewards of the Tang family's Chamber of Commerce, who looked ordinary but gave off an extremely powerful vibe, walked in from outside, bowed to Xianyuan and the archbishop, and stood behind them. A few moments later, the officials of the Great Zhou Embassy also arrived. Although their emotions were rather complex, even somewhat hesitant and conflicted, they ultimately walked over to Xianyuan's group and stood on Xianyuan's other side. Xianyuan was a member of the Bear tribe, but today he was a student of the Orthodox Academy. Whether it was the archbishop, the officials of the embassy, or the stewards of the Tang family's Chamber of Commerce, none of them knew how the imperial court, the Li Palace, Wenshui City, or the South would respond, but at this tense and sensitive moment, they had to clearly express their stance. In the ending of that rumor, that foolish and shameless bear youth saw that the principal of the Orthodox Academy at the time, the current Pope, Chun Chongsheng, was about to be killed by the Tianhai Divine Empress, and that the Orthodox Academy was about to be destroyed, so he fled. The appearance of the great Zhou officials and the Tang clan stewards, especially the Archbishop of the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes, directly declared that the ending of the rumor was false. Xiaoda gazed at the distant Xianyuan Pe, his brows slightly rising. He knew the name Xianyuan Pe, but that was all. The legendary story that the demi-human populace had once enthusiastically discussed was not even worth mentioning to an important figure like him. In those few years of the Orthodox Academy, Xianyuan Pe was definitely the least famous person, extremely ordinary. Whether it was Tang 36, Su Moyu, or Zhixiu, they were all far more famous, much less Princess Luluo or Chen Changsheng. Xiaoda had not expected Xianyuan Pe to suddenly appear today and cause such a great disturbance. He couldn't help but feel a little wary. It seemed that Xianyuan Pe had been hiding in White Emperor City for many years. Could it be that Chen Changsheng and the Orthodoxy had long since made preparations for today's events? Many important figures of the demi-human race had the same thought as Xiaoda. The palace behind the imperial city's observation platform became abnormally quiet. The bear tribe leader ignored all gazes and slowly walked out of the hall. The chief elder seated at the highest position seemed to still be sleeping. The only one qualified to sit at an even higher position was Madame Mu. She knew that Xianyuan Pe had been living in White Emperor City this entire time. At the very beginning, she had dispatched hidden guards to keep an eye on him for a very long time, but Xianyuan Pe had never shown any signs of activity, so she had gradually relaxed her surveillance. Only today did she suddenly see him again. But she thought differently from Xiaoda, the elders, and the ministers. She was confident that neither the Orthodoxy nor the Great Zhou imperial court would have time to react, much less make preparations. Logically speaking, she had nothing to worry about, but she had clearly heard that voice just now. Orthodox Academy, Xianyuan Pe. In the end, this fellow was still a student of the Orthodox Academy. Would he affect her plans? A faint killing intent flashed through Madame Mu's eyes. When the heavenly selection ceremony began, Luoluo looked into the distance from a high vantage point, calmly and thoughtlessly gazing at the 9 celestial trees in the distant mountains. As the battle raged on in White Emperor City, Luoluo began to take an afternoon nap. Using the freshest incense, she slept soundly. As dusk descended and the candidates to enter the celestial trees to be baptized by the wildfire were about to appear, she drank tea, appearing very calm. She did not suppress her emotions, nor did she pretend. This was because she was born with a noble air, and her teacher had once taught her that she had to be calm in every major event. She was truly very calm, because she simply did not care about this heavenly selection ceremony. No matter what the final result was, no matter what her father and mother thought, no matter what the elders, ministers, and people thought, no matter what the demons and humans thought, as long as she was not willing, she would not accept it. She had once heard Mo Yu say that the Divine Empress had once evaluated that junior martial mother. What her teacher's wife could do, she could naturally do as well. She had never expressed any opposition, had always quietly waited, because she knew that opposition was meaningless. It was also because she had always been waiting for her teacher's arrival. If her teacher did not come, no. If her teacher could not come, no. If her teacher did not make it in time, in the end, she had to leave, bid farewell to the imperial palace, to this city, and to the Red River, never to meet again. She held the teacup and glanced at the stone pearl on her wrist as she silently thought to herself. At this moment, Guardian Li hurried in and looked at her with a complicated expression, saying, 7 victors. Of the 9 celestial trees, why are there only 7? Luoluo thought to herself, there must be some scheme behind this. Rather annoyed, she took a sip of tea. Guardian Li hesitated, then said, 1 is Xianyuan Pe. Plop. Luoluo spat out all the tea. Chapter 960. Xianyuan Pe was participating in the heavenly selection ceremony, and he had even won 9 matches in a row. Tomorrow, he was going to enter the celestial tree and accept the trials of the wildfire and the ancestral spirits. Luoluo was shocked by this news, and it took her quite a while before she came to her senses. She took the silk handkerchief from Guardian Li's hands and wiped the tea, but her furrowed brows could not be smoothed out. She knew that once the news of the heavenly selection ceremony spread, Xian Yuan would assuredly do something. So she had sent people to keep an eye on him. But seeing that there was no reply in 2 days, she believed that there was nothing to worry about. Who could have expected that Xian Yuan would sign up for the heavenly selection? She could not understand why Xian Yuan would participate in the heavenly selection ceremony. With his personality, it was more likely that he would take a kitchen knife and barge into the imperial palace in an attempt to save her. Just what does this fellow want to do? Guardianly gazed at Luo's furrowed brows and inwardly sighed in worry. She thought of a certain possibility, but it was truly difficult to accept. Xian Yuan liked the princess, but the princess liked His Holiness the Pope. Why did the people of the Orthodox Academy all like this? Upon learning of Xian Yuan's identity and background, countless gazes fell upon him. The luxuriously dressed denizens of the upper city and the reserved noble ladies all had their mouths agape, so shocked that they didn't know what to say. As for the people of the lower city that had come with Xian Yuan, they had already known a few things, but upon receiving confirmation, they still found it impossible to suppress their excitement. The high official in charge of the heavenly selection ceremony had an extremely unsightly expression. He looked at Xian Yuan's bearded face that still retained its childishness and coldly asked, "Why have you come to participate in the heavenly selection ceremony?" Logically speaking, this question was meaningless and did not need to be raised. Everyone knew what benefits participating in the heavenly selection ceremony would bring them. Or else why would the young experts of the demi-human tribes all rush to White Emperor City in such a short amount of time? But when it came to Xian Yuan, this question was extremely meaningful, and it was a question that everyone present wanted to know the answer to. Because if that rumor was true, then Xian Yuan was not only a student of the Orthodox Academy, but also Princess Lolua's student. Don't tell me you also want to marry Her Highness? The high-ranking official stared into Xian Yuan's eyes, his voice extremely low, filled with anger and disdain. Don't forget, even though the imperial court has no records, everyone knows that you were once a disciple of the Orthodox Academy. Master and disciple eventually became partners. This kind of thing was not unheard of on the continent, but in the end, it was not a good thing. Especially for students, if they had such thoughts, anyone would think that it was an improper thought. Xian Yuan said, "To be able to become Her Highness' student is my greatest honor. Whether Her Highness acknowledges it or not, I will always be her student." The high-ranking official became even angrier and coldly rebuked. "Then why did you come to participate in the heavenly selection ceremony? Are you trying to humiliate His Highness?" Xian Yuan said, "I have never thought of marrying Your Highness. How? Is this humiliation?" The high-ranking official asked. "In that case, why have you come here?" Xian Yuan thought about it and said, "I'm here to cause trouble." When he said this, his expression was very serious and his tone was very firm. He was like a mud monkey that had just crawled out of a rice paddy, a mischievous kid that had jumped from a tree into a lake, yet he spoke like an old scholar. The high-ranking official somewhat didn't dare believe his ears. "What do you want to do?" Xian Yuan explained, "By causing trouble, I mean that I want to make it impossible for the heavenly selection ceremony to smoothly proceed." The high-ranking official vaguely understood what he meant and asked, "You don't want Her Highness to marry?" "Correct." Xian Yuan gazed at the distant Xiaoda, the second prince of the great western continent, and the other participants, and then raised his head to the high ground of the imperial city. He earnestly and firmly declared, "No one wants to marry Her Highness, because I will not let you win." It was very quiet in front of the imperial city, and his voice was very bright, able to travel very far. The high-ranking official sneered. "The heavenly selection ceremony is for the ancestral spirits to choose a husband for Her Highness the Princess. Why do you have to stop them?" Xian Yuan replied, "No one can decide on Her Highness' marriage, not the wildfire of the celestial trees or the ancestral spirits." The crowd fell into an uproar at these words. The high-ranking official was so angry that his entire body trembled. He harshly yelled, "You dare blaspheme the celestial trees, disrespect the ancestral spirits." If it really was up to the wildfire of the celestial trees and the ancestral spirits to choose, the heavenly selection ceremony would not have proceeded according to the current procedure, and there would not have been a baptism of the wildfire in the second round. In the end, the so-called heavenly selection is a self-choice. Her Highness marriage can only be decided by Her Highness herself. Xin Yuanpa gazed up at the imperial city and said, I know that Her Highness the Princess would never be willing to marry an outsider. No matter how angry that high official was, no matter how aloof and intimidating that palace was, his expression was always just that calm, to the extent where he even seemed a bit wooden. His voice was the same, yet it possessed a type of strangely persuasive power. Countless cheers rose from all around the imperial city. These voices came from the most ordinary demi-human populace, regardless of whether it was the upper, middle, or lower part of the city, because Xin Yuanpa had spoken their minds. It was rumored that the Empress wholeheartedly wanted to marry Princess Luoluo off to her nephew, but the Council of Elders and clan leaders strongly opposed this, forcing the heavenly selection ceremony to be held. Even so, the Empress had not changed her mind. Look, the second prince of the great western continent is standing not far from the imperial city. How could Princess Luoluo be married to an outsider? What right did he have to become the next white emperor? The vast majority of the demi-human populace thought this way, but they did not dare to express their thoughts due to the Empress's centuries of majesty. Only when Xin Yuanpa said these words did they feel a great deal of satisfaction. After participating in the heavenly selection ceremony and passing through layers of selections, those who can ultimately stand here are all true experts, just like you. A cold and dignified voice resounded from the highest point of the imperial city, piercing through the clouds and descending to the ground. The White Emperor was in seclusion, so this was the only voice of the entire demi-human race. The imperial city instantly fell silent. Many demi-human populace kneeled on the ground. And how do you know that Luoluo isn't willing to marry one of you? Many of the demi-human populace were perplexed by these words. Whether it's the heavenly selection or the trial of the ancestral spirit, the great western continent's second prince, as an outsider, has no advantage. Could that rumor be false? Had they wrongly accused the Empress? Yes, the entire continent knew that Princess Luoluo was the Empress' only daughter and had always been doted on. How could the Empress possibly treat her unfavorably? Presumably, she just wanted to find the best marriage for Princess. As they thought of this, the crowd began to look at Xin Yuanpa in a different light. This being the case, you shouldn't have come to make trouble. Xin Yuanpa looked up at the imperial city and said, Her Highness does not like anyone here. Madame Mu's voice was still cold. And how do you know? This question was extremely difficult to answer. Madame Mu was Luoluo's mother, so how could Xin Yuanpa know something that not even she knew? Did he really have something to do with Her Highness? Countless gazes once more fell on Xin Yuanpa. Some people wanted to know his answer, but even more people and important personages hoped that he would not say another word. Xin Yuanpa had no idea what they were thinking, nor did he need to think before giving his answer. Of course I know. Everyone in the Orthodox Academy knows. He seriously said, Her Highness likes the principal, so how could she be willing to marry someone else? Chapter 9:61. The surroundings of the imperial city once more fell into absolute silence. The principal that Xin Yuanpa was referring to was naturally the principal of Orthodox Academy, the current pope, Chen Chongsheng. Princess Luoluo liked Chen Chongsheng. In terms of status and age, Chen Chongsheng was naturally the best choice. But the problem was the entire continent knew that Princess Luoluo was Chen Chongsheng's student, and that Chen Chongsheng already had a Taoist companion, the Holy Maiden of the South, Su Yurong. What was with Xin Yuanpa's words? The great Zhou imperial court official slightly arched his brows in displeasure. The Archbishop of the Western Waste slightly paled, but he ultimately said nothing. The Tang clan steward also forcefully suppressed his emotions and maintained his silence. The imperial city's observation platform was also quiet. The demi-human personages in the hall looked at each other in dismay, completely at a loss as to how to react. Was Xin Yuanpa speaking the truth? Princess Luoluo had always secretly liked her teacher. How could this be? At the highest point of the imperial city, Madame Mu also said nothing, her complexion rather unsightly. Other than the earliest members of the Orthodox Academy, not many people could guess at Luoluo's thoughts. She was Luoluo's birth mother, so she naturally knew long ago. What she didn't expect was that Xianyuan would expose this matter in front of so many people. It had to be known that this matter would have an extremely bad effect on both Chen Chongqing's and Luoluo's reputations. Why had Xianyuan done this? Was he really stupid, or was he bad? In the other stone hall, Luoluo also knew of Xianyuan's words. She recalled the words her mother had said when she left that morning. Even if you can deceive the entire world, how can you deceive yourself? She had always carefully stored away her feelings, not letting anyone, not even Chen Chongqing, see them. She had originally believed that this would continue, but she had not expected that those fellows in the Orthodox Academy had already known. Now the entire world knew. What should she do? She was truly too embarrassed. She couldn't help but inwardly complain about Xianyuan. Perhaps it was because of the deepening twilight. Her small face was slightly red. For some reason, she was not angry, but rather a little happy. The silence was because they were too shocked, so they were a loss. Everyone who heard Xianyuan's words panicked and lost their minds. Silence also meant that the atmosphere would become tense. Impudent! How dare you be so disrespectful to His Highness and speak such nonsense? The high-ranking official looked at Xianyuan, his whole body trembling with anger. He pointed at Xianyuan's face and shouted, "Someone!" Before he could finish speaking, and before the Red River Beast Guard had rushed over to chop off Xianyuan's troublemaking tongue, a voice rang out. That voice was very low, like the ringing of an ancient bell. It reverberated in front of the imperial city, like the echoes of a mountain stream in a deep valley. This was not Madame Mu's voice, but the voice of another powerful personage of the demi-human race. In the stone hall behind the observation platform, Great Elder slowly opened his eyes, no longer pretending to be asleep. He slowly stood up, walked out of the hall, and arrived at the imperial city wall. The mountain-like figure landed far below, shrouding the heads of many people. The Great Elder didn't comment on Xianyuan's last sentence, as if he hadn't heard it at all. Regardless of whether it was for the dignity of the demon race or the complex relationship with the human race, this was perhaps the best response. What you said just now was correct. The so-called heaven's choice ultimately depends on one's own abilities. I hope that you can obtain the blessing of the ancestral spirits tomorrow and walk to the end the day after tomorrow. All of White Emperor City could hear the Great Elder's deep and distant voice. This was his stance towards Xianyuan, extremely clear and distinct, and it might also be his stance toward the human race. Thus, there was no longer any difficulty. The official and the Red River Beast Guard prepared to arrest Xianyuan, retreated. Madame Mu stood at the highest point of the imperial city, silently gazing at the distant mountains, her thoughts inscrutable. Just like the Tathagata, the impoverished populace from the lower city left the imperial city like a tide, drowning the stairway to heaven, and then gradually dispersing into the poor alleys and narrow streets. As they labored day after day, it was impossible to say if they would remember today's liveliness in the years to come. Before dispersing, this black tide first sent Xianyuan back to the pine paths tonight. The pine paths were particularly lively, but not noisy. The priests from the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes calmly and warily stood at the high points of the streets, observing the activity around them. The steward of the Tang clan led several dozen cultivators from the south, using his sharp gazes to stare at all the places where lanterns were lit. A few stalwart and burly men brimming with strength stood on the perimeter, inspecting all the people entering the pine paths. No matter how one looked at it, it was very easy for a human faction to arrange such an array in the demi-human capital to cause trouble, and it would seem extremely disrespectful to the demi-human court. Madame Mu had moved too quickly. It had only been a few days since the rumors had begun to spread to the official opening of the heavenly selection ceremony. The human race simply had no time to react. As the representative of the Orthodox Academy, Xin Yuan Pa naturally became the greatest, perhaps the only, hope of the human race in White Emperor City. In order to ensure Xin Yuan Pa's safety, the Archbishop and the others did not care about the dissatisfaction of the demi-human race. Moreover, they clearly expressed their distrust of the demi-human race. The Archbishop warmly looked at Xin Yuan Pa, and the Tang clan steward's face was also brimming with hope. Xin Yuan Pa understood what they were thinking. In the view of the Archbishop and the others, Xin Yuan Pa had disappeared for many years. His sudden appearance today had presumably been ordered by the Li Palace. Does His Holiness the Pope know of this matter? The Archbishop nervously asked Xin Yuan Pa, or is His Venerable Holiness already here? Xin Yuan Pa shook his head. Principal probably does not know of this matter. From his expression, the Archbishop and the others knew that he was not lying and couldn't help but fall silent. The events that had taken place at the closing of South Stream Temple had already reached White Emperor City 2 nights ago. The Archbishop was well aware that if the Li Palace knew of this matter, it would pay any price to destroy Madame Mu's plans. He had also done this. At the very start, he had torn up the invitation to the banquet, expressing his most intense stance. But if the Pope still did not know of this matter, the Li Palace would not have time to make arrangements. Just what could he and Xin Yuan Pa do? The Archbishop recalled Xin Yuan Pa's words and felt an intense fear and unease. If there really was something between Princess Luluo and the Pope, would the Pope, in a fit of rage, use sacred fire to burn him to death? In his agitated mood, his face was slightly red as if he had drunk a good deal of strong wine. I beg of you. He looked at Xin Yuan Pa and solemnly said, even if millions must die, you cannot let Her Highness marry that second prince of the great Western continent. Chapter 962. Even if 10 million people died, I would still advance. Xin Yuan Pa felt that he could try this sort of thing. But if it really did turn out like the Archbishop said, if 10 million people really did die, Xin Yuan Pa could not make up his mind. Moreover, based on his understanding of Princess Luluo, if she knew that she had to pay such an enormous price, she might prepare her dowry overnight and marry off the next morning. The Archbishop stood on tiptoe and patted Xin Yuan Pa on the shoulder. After giving him a deep glance, he left with the Tang clan steward. The Bear tribe leader, who had been waiting at the mouth of the alley for a very long time, walked over. He gave Xin Yuan Pa a deep glance and then patted him on the shoulder. He did not need to stand on tiptoe, as he was even taller and more muscular than Xin Yuan Pa. The great Zhou officials went to the imperial city, but they did not come here. This means that their imperial court does not mind that Her Highness is married off to the second prince of the great Western continent. The Bear tribe leader asked, just what is His Holiness the Pope thinking? Xin Yuan Pa replied, he probably doesn't know of this matter. The Bear tribe leader asked, today was your own idea? Xin Yuan Pa grunted in affirmation. The Bear tribe leader sighed at him and said, back then, I wanted you to return to the tribe, but you refused, insisting on staying in White Emperor City. I couldn't do anything to you. Xin Yuan Pa very seriously said, in the future, I will work hard for the tribe. We'll talk about this later. What I want to say is that you already won in the Pine Paths, so why did you go to the other 2 fighting platforms? This is already breaking the rules of the heavenly selection ceremony. The Bear tribe leader gestured 2 numbers and said, if not for these 2 acting as your guarantor, Her Majesty could have made it so that you wouldn't be able to enter the celestial tree tomorrow. Xin Yuan Pa was rather shocked by the Bear tribe leader's hand. Why are the Xiang clan leader and the Shi clan leader speaking up for me? He replied, I wasn't thinking that much, nor was I intentionally breaking the rules. I just thought that if anyone dares to have any designs on Her Highness, I will beat them down. The Bear tribe leader recalled Xin Yuan Pa's words in front of the imperial city and couldn't help but arch his brows. Quite bold, but can you beat Xiaoda? Xin Yuan Pa very seriously pondered this question and came to a very certain conclusion. I can't beat him. The Bear tribe leader's raised brows fell back down. He sighed and said, then what's the point of saying all this? Xin Yuan Pa said, I want to give it a try. At least I want to persevere until the end. The Bear Tribe patriarch understood his meaning. The so-called persisting to the end was just stalling for time. If he could delay for one more day, the orthodoxy would have a better chance of responding, though it seemed that the chances were still very slim. White Emperor City and the capital were separated by 80,000 li of mountains and rivers. In the battle between the divine the day before yesterday, the seal had severed the connection between the two. The Bear Tribe leader thought for a while, then suddenly said, Shouta might not be able to last until the end. Xianyuan Po was slightly startled when he heard this. He didn't understand the meaning of this sentence. When you participated in the heavenly selection ceremony, you were wholeheartedly thinking about Her Highness's marriage. The Bear Tribe leader stared into his eyes and said, But do not forget that their goal is to become the White Emperor. Xianyuan Po was even more confused. If he won the heavenly selection ceremony and married Princess Luoluo, wouldn't he become the next White Emperor? The Bear Tribe leader left, but he did not explain anything. He only left behind a few very serious words. Your current ability to have these priests and the Tang clan stewards protect you truly is because of the Orthodox Academy, but do not forget that it was the tribe that sent you to the capital. Even if you insist on using the identity of the Orthodox Academy to fight, your orbit shouldn't be too crooked. When you act, you should also consider the interests of the tribe. Xianyuan Po did not retort, only remained silent. These words were very reasonable. If not for the tribe's recommendation and favor, he would have never had the chance to go to the capital, much less meet Qin Changsheng and Luoluo, and then become the third student of the Orthodox Academy. As he watched the Bear Tribe leader's stalwart figure gradually vanish into the darkness, Xianyuan Po suddenly thought of Tang 36. If Tang 36 heard these words, he would definitely mock him for having such a fat, but that he couldn't sit on a single stool. Yes, why fret over which side his but should sit on? Couldn't he just sit on 2 stools at the same time? Xianyuan Po instantly felt his body become much lighter. He turned and walked into the depths of the alley. The Bear Tribe warriors guarded the outermost street. The Tang clan experts and several cultivators from the south occupied the higher ground, and the priests of the Taoist Church of the Western Waste guarded the alley. The alley was very quiet, devoid of any sound. Nearby was the temple of the celestial tree in the pine paths. It was abnormally quiet in the darkness, and one could faintly smell the scent of lamp oil. At the very depths of the alley was the small courtyard that Xianyuan Po had lived in for several years. He pushed open the wooden door and walked into the courtyard. Stepping over the round white stones, he took off his shoes, washed his feet with clean water, and stood on the wooden floor. He glanced at the short pine tree by the white wall, took in a deep breath, calmed his mind, and walked into the room. The small courtyard seemed quiet, but many people were hidden. Besides those who had been ordered to protect him, there were also many people who were coldly watching him. These gazes came from certain tribes, from the Council of Elders, from the Great Western Continent, and most of them naturally came from the demi-human imperial court. If anyone discovered that the 2 experts of the divine domain, wanted by the imperial court, had been living in this small courtyard this entire time, Xianyuan Po was confident that the warriors of the tribe, the priests, and the human cultivators would be incapable of preventing the small courtyard from being flattened. Biyang Hong and Wu Qiangbai's injuries seemed to have gotten a little better. Xianyuan Po did not understand medicine, so he could not be sure. Wu Qiangbei had lost a great deal of blood after losing her arm, and her face was still pale, but she had eaten all the steamed bun she had brought in the morning. Biyang Hong, on the other hand, was quietly sitting there, his expression calm and composed. Xianyuan Po noticed that the crystals on the floor had become much fainter, and the wooden pagodas had apparently been moved. Sir, are you all right? The light in the room was rather dim, so he could not confirm that the deathly aura on Biyang Hong's face had dissipated. With a gentle expression, Biyang Hong replied, I'm a little better, but I'm a little hungry. Xianyuan Po came to his senses and hurriedly left to prepare dinner. But when he pushed open the paper door, he stopped and turned around to give Biyang Hong a very serious bow. Thank you, sir. He was thanking Biyang Hong for the words he had said to him in the morning. The fighting experience of an expert of the continent was the most precious harvest for any cultivator. Walking out of the room, he took some firewood from the neat pile and began to light a fire to cook. There were not many winter vegetables stored in the house, so he only made 2 simple dishes and stewed a pot of bacon and potato rice. Byung-hong took the food and gave his thanks. Wu Qiong-bai's complexion was still very nasty, but in the end, she said no more harsh words, only snorted. Chapter 963. Byung-hong noticed that Xian Yuan-po was not holding a pair of chopsticks and asked in concern, "Aren't you going to eat?" He knew that Xian Yuan-po was going to participate in the heavenly selection ceremony today, but he had not asked because he could guess the result from Xian Yuan-po's expression. He was more concerned that Xian Yuan-po was going to the celestial tree tomorrow to be refined by the wildfire. How could he not eat his fill tonight? "I have something to eat." Xian Yuan-po took out a paper bag from his bosom, took out the leftover beef buns, and began to eat with the half bowl of vegetable soup in front of him. Wu Qiong-bai froze at this sight, but then she ignored it and lowered her head to eat. After a while, she raised her head and realized that Byung-hong had been staring at the bun in Xian Yuan-po's hand the entire time. She couldn't help but frown. The bun was so cold that it had hardened and the juices had congealed into white oil. How unpalatable was it? Why was her husband staring at it? Before daybreak, the pine paths were shrouded in darkness, but Xian Yuan-po had already gotten up. He walked out of the alley and indicated to the vigilant priest that there was nothing to do. He went to a neighboring street and bought a paper bag of beef buns, half a pot of white porridge, 2 bowls of corn paste, a bowl of dry mixed noodles, 2 fried glutinous rice cakes, a tray of steamed buns, and 3 kinds of pickled vegetables. He still ate the beef buns, but the rest were the food he had prepared for Byung-hong and Wu Qiong-bai for an entire day. Under Byung-hong's meaningful and Wu Qiong-bai's furious gazes, Xian Yuan-po silently ate 6 beef buns, washed up, tidied up his clothes, and solemnly bowed to Byung-hong. He took the mountain sea sword from the pile of firewood and walked out of the courtyard. Unlike yesterday, he attracted countless gazes as soon as he appeared today. Several dozen priests of the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes and 100-some warriors of the Bear Tribe surrounded him as he walked to Jade Capital Ferry. Xian Yuan-po noticed that the Tang clan steward and several cultivators of the south were also following, neither too far nor too close. Last night, he had seen those cultivators of the south. According to the Tang clan steward, one of them came from Gentle Stream Monastery and was supposedly Yi Xiaoyan's martial uncle in the outer sect. The morning mist shrouded White Emperor City, just like it had on every other ordinary winter day for the past tens of thousands of years. Jade Capital Ferry was as lively as ever, but those who occupied the best positions on the pier were no longer those laborious farmers, but officials of the demi-human imperial court and important figures like the Bear Tribe leader. The morning sun was blocked by the mountains on the other side of the river. Coupled with the thick fog, the sky was very gloomy, as if it was still night. After boarding the ferry, a wave suddenly rose up in the Red River, causing the boat to sway slightly. Then, a low and terrifying roar came from somewhere. If an outsider had heard these roars and felt the furious waves of the Red River, they would have felt a great deal of fear. But everyone present had lived in White Emperor City for a long time and knew that this was the noise caused by the Jujing waking up and eating, so they thought little of it. As several baskets of the fattest scaleless barracuda were thrown into the river, the roars quickly died down. The morning mist gradually dispersed, and they could already see the river nearby. The surface of the water was very calm. The mountains on the other side of the river were still shrouded in mist. Even though the morning sun was about to leap over a certain col, one could only faintly make out the silhouettes of those 9 massive celestial trees. The bow of the boat broke through the water, the waves crashing as the morning light gradually arrived. By the time it reached the other side of the river, the warm red rays of the morning sun had already driven away all the mist. Green mountains that stretched for countless li appeared before everyone's eyes like countless overlapping barriers. In the morning light, the 9 celestial trees in the mountains seemed like massive torches, exuding an invisible wildfire that both awed and delighted the demi-human race. The celestial trees were so massive that only the most majestic of mountains could bear their weight. They were also very far from each other, the closest several dozen li away. There were 9 paths leading to the celestial trees, all of them starting from the same place, the high platform on the other side of Jade Capital Ferry. Madame Mu stood on the high platform. The descent of the morning light clearly illuminated her figure, making her seem especially lofty. In the gentle breeze, her gorgeous dress swayed in the wind, making her seem particularly dignified. The Tianhai Divine Empress and Pope Yin had already returned to the Sea of Stars, the Holy Maiden of the South, and Suli had gone to the distant Sacred Light Continent, and the White Emperor was quietly recovering from his injuries. Of the 5 saints of the past, only she would appear before the people of the world. The demi-human elders and the ministers and generals of the demi-human court stood in 2 rows below. Only the truly powerful figures and their attendants had the right to attend today. The mood was very solemn, so quiet that not a single sound could be heard. Ceremonial music began to play as everyone prostrated. An official of the court stepped forward and began to recite the funeral rites. After the funeral rites were recited, the offerings were delivered like flowing water. The entire process proceeded smoothly. Xin Yuan Pe and the other 5 ascended the stone steps to the high platform. Countless gazes fell on their backs, and then countless thoughts began to emerge in their minds. Who would be able to pass today's baptism by the wildfire of the celestial trees, pass the trial of the ancestral spirits? And who would be able to obtain the final victory in tomorrow's grand ceremony and marry Princess Luoluo? Xiaoda had the strongest cultivation and a pure bloodline. Logically speaking, no one could defeat him. But it was obvious that the Empress favored the second prince of the great Western continent, and perhaps even the White Emperor. Otherwise, why would the chief elder have become so silent after that night? And there was also that Xin Yuan Pe who had suddenly appeared. He was clearly a descendant of the Bear tribe, but he was representing the Orthodox Academy in this battle. In terms of background alone, he was rather powerful, but the human race probably had not yet had the time to respond. He was probably acting on his own, so what could he do? The other 2 demi-human experts were also famous, so it should not be difficult for them to pass the trial of the ancestral spirits. If Xiaoda was the slightest bit careless, he really might lose to them tomorrow. But why did the young man in the bamboo hat not even glance at them? Why did he seem so aloof and proud? If one had to point out the most surprising aspect of this heavenly selection ceremony, besides Xin Yuan Po's sudden appearance, it was this young man in the bamboo hat. The identities and backgrounds of Xiaoda, the second prince of the great Western continent, and the 2 demi-human experts were all clear. Even Xin Yuan Pa had nothing to hide, but even now, no one knew who the young man in the bamboo hat was, where he came from, or what he wanted to do. Logically speaking, this was something that should have never happened. The spies of the imperial court and the various tribes had long ago begun their secret investigations. But the problem was that White Emperor City was faintly concealing the young man in the bamboo hat. It was an extremely secretive and yet unyielding power that had cut off all attempts to spy on the young man. To be able to prevent the important figures of the imperial court and the various tribes from finding out his identity and background, and to do so in such a manner, this power was far too terrifying. Many tribes quickly stopped their investigations out of fear. Even the spies of the imperial court ultimately only learned the residence of the young man and then stopped. The young man in the bamboo hat lived in a courtyard very close to the Xiang clan's estate. It was easy to make a connection. It was not that no one had thought that the young man in the bamboo hat might not be a demi-human, might even be an enemy of the demi-human race. But even if this was the case, it did not matter. Because today, the young man in the bamboo hat would enter the celestial tree to be baptized by the wildfire, to accept the trial of the ancestral spirits. If this person truly did harbor enmity towards the demi-human race, if he was a spy sent by the human race, or even the demon race, then he would assuredly be incinerated by the wildfire. This had always been the core of the heavenly selection ceremony. Only a life that swore loyalty to the White Emperor clan could endure the baptism of the wildfire of the celestial tree and the trial of the ancestral spirits. An expert that could pass this trial would automatically leave their tribe and become a member of the White Emperor clan. It was precisely because of this that the demi-human elders, ministers, and generals had ultimately agreed to Madame Mu's arrangements. Countless gazes fell upon the second prince of the great western continent, some solemn, some cold, some questioning, some malicious. Last night, news of what had happened at the closing of South Stream Temple had already reached White Emperor City. The imperial clan of the great western continent truly had a grand scheme. Could the second prince really be willing to transform his body and soul and become a member of the demi-human race? Even if by doing so, he might become the next White Emperor. Under countless gazes, the second prince of the great western continent turned to the demi-human elders, ministers, and generals. The morning light fell on his handsome face, but it was impossible to clearly see what he was truly feeling. There seemed to be some regret, some relief, but ultimately it transformed into calm. He said, "I withdraw." Chapter 964. The words of the great western continent's second prince caused the audience to fall silent for a moment, then into an uproar. Shouta gazed at his figure, his eyes chilling. The other two demi-human experts glanced at each other, seeing the shock on each other's faces. Xinyuan Po's mouth was open, but he had no idea what to say. Only the young man in the bamboo hat quietly stood at his original position, his head slightly lowered as he remained hidden in the shadows. Whether it was the rumors or the subsequent events, they all indicated that the Empress was prepared to marry Princess Luoluo to the great western continent's second prince. In the eyes of Xinyuan Po and the representatives of the Taoist churches and emissaries, he was the person they were most wary of. But today, he had suddenly announced that he would withdraw from the heavenly selection ceremony. Just what was going on here? Were the rumors false? Were the events that had already occurred also false? Why had the Empress held this heavenly selection ceremony? Just what was she preparing to do? Just who did she want to marry Princess Luoluo to? Shouta or those two demi-human experts with similarly powerful backgrounds? Could she be preparing to marry Princess Luoluo to the person Xinyuan represented? The Pope? Countless gazes fell on the high platform, shifting between Madame Mu and the great western continent's second prince. The demi-human elders, ministers, and generals all want to know just what sort of mystery this aunt and nephew was playing, and also wanted to know what sort of explanation the great western continent's second prince had. Correct. I came with the diplomatic mission to White Emperor City to marry cousin, because I like her. The great western continent's second prince paused, a bitter smile appearing on his face. But since cousin already has someone she truly loves, why should I stick a knife in the middle? I don't want her to hold a grudge against me for this matter. Many gazes turned to Xinyuan Po. The great western continent's second prince's cousin was Luoluo. When he said that cousin had someone she truly loved, he was naturally responding to Xinyuan Po's word from yesterday. Before yesterday, not many people knew that Princess Luoluo loved her teacher, nor would they have believed it. But when Xinyuan Po said those words, many people suddenly realized that it was highly likely to be true. Regardless of whether the great western continent's second prince was speaking the truth or not, he had used this excuse to withdraw from the heavenly selection, so no one could say anything. Moreover, by pointing out his reason for withdrawing from the heavenly selection, he was adding fuel to the fire. Luoluo and Chun Changshen were assuredly under even more pressure. Madame Mu showed no reaction. The withdrawal of the great western continent's second prince had been part of her plan. Although his last words were not arranged by her, they had been tacitly approved by her. She was more concerned about one thing, or rather, that was the only thing she was concerned about. The morning light gradually became brighter. No one noticed that she seemed to be unintentionally looking in a certain direction, but in fact, it was a very profound look. The young man in the bamboo hat was standing there. From the very start, Madame Mu had known who this young man was. Every time she thought about how this person dared to leave Xiulao City alone and come here, even she couldn't help but be deeply shocked. This was one of Black Robe's conditions. Although she agreed, she didn't believe it was that simple. Logically speaking, this young man in the bamboo hat should have been incapable of passing the trial of the ancestral spirits, so his fate was assuredly miserable. Of course, if it were any other young expert, in order to pass the ancestral spirits test and marry Luoluo, they might really take a huge risk and accept the baptism of the wildfire of the celestial tree to reconstruct their body and soul, becoming a true member of the Yao clan. Everyone wanted to become the next White Emperor. This was the greatest temptation that not even an expert of the proclamation of liberation like Xiaoda could resist. The problem was that given this young man's status, he could never become the next White Emperor, and he would not be willing. If there were people on the continent that could resist this temptation, this young man and the young emperor of the Great Zhou were unquestionably the top two. So why had Black Robe proposed this condition? Why had this young man participated in the heavenly selection and was willing to take the risk of entering the celestial tree to accept the baptism of the wildfire? If it was just to form an alliance with the demi-human race and resist the increasingly powerful human race, there were many other methods. The Xian clan leader did not look at the young man in the bamboo hat, but his attention had always been on him. What Madame Mu could not understand, he also could not understand. Moreover, he did not know the specifics of the agreement, so he was even more worried. He asked, "Will something happen?" Madame Mu replied, "Black Robe has always taken every possibility into account. Nothing should happen." After a pause, she indifferently added, "If something happens to him here, I believe that it will also be a good thing." The Xian clan leader understood her meaning. After a moment of silence, he said, "The mountain-cleaving army reached the north of Tsong province last night. The mountain-cleaving army was the strongest army of the demi-human race. For tens of thousands of years, it had been stationed in the frigid north, keeping an eye on the movements of the demons." Madame Mu replied, "Chief Elder's arrangements naturally cannot be wrong." The Xian clan leader finally couldn't help but glance at the young man in the bamboo hat. If today this young man died in the baptism of the wildfire of the celestial trees, then the strongest army of the demi-human race, the mountain-cleaving army, would notify the Great Zhou's Tsong province army headquarters in the shortest time possible, and then head north. The war would begin. The second prince of the great western continent withdrew from the heavenly selection. The final 5 people left the high platform and followed different paths to different mountains. On the peaks of the 5 mountains, there were 5 incomparably huge trees. Nobody could tell how many feet tall these trees were, and they pierced deep into the sea of clouds. It was impossible to see the tops of the trees, and it was impossible to imagine how many miles the roots of these trees extended underground. The closer one got to the giant trees, the hotter it became. Invisible but incomparably real waves of heat rose up from the earth, blowing everywhere like the sultry winds of midsummer. These waves of heat were the chi of the wildfire of the celestial trees. As the heavenly selection ceremony progressed, the wildfire of the celestial trees grew even more active, sending surging energy into the world. This energy seemed endless, but it also had a unique savagery to it, a feeling of exuberant life. The young man in the bamboo hat walked up to his celestial tree. At the base of the celestial tree was a tree hole. This tree hole was several dozen zhang high and 100 some zhang wide. It looked like a naturally formed cave in the mountains, so massive that it seemed like the entire stone hall of White Emperor City's imperial palace could be placed inside. What made one speechless was that there really was a stone hall in this massive tree hole. The young man's gaze moved from the upper part of the celestial tree, which was submerged in the clouds, to the stone hall within the tree hole. After a moment of silence, he pressed the front of his bamboo hat even lower and walked into the tree hole. His figure quickly vanished from the stone hall, his whereabouts unknown. Xiaoda and the other 2 demi-human experts also entered their celestial trees. The last to enter the celestial tree was Xian Yuanpe. His footsteps were rather heavy, his movements rather slow, because his mood was rather heavy and uneasy. He was a demi-human descendant. He had heard countless legends about the wildfire of the celestial trees and had personally offered sacrifices to the ancestral spirits countless times. He was worried that his true intentions would be seen through by the ancestral spirits. He had not participated in the heavenly selection ceremony to obtain the final victory, marry Princess Luluo, and become the next White Emperor. He had come to make trouble. Would the ancestral spirits forgive his disrespect? As he walked into the gloomy stone hall and through the long stone path, the unease in Xin Yuan Po's heart intensified. Through his senses, he was certain that he was walking underground, and that he had already gone very far. The stone path was extremely dry, devoid of moisture, and there was no sign of water or moss. There was only the incessant blowing of the hot wind. The deeper he went, the hotter the wind became. As a demi-human descendant, he could clearly sense that the chi of the wildfire was getting stronger and stronger. The blazing waves of heat did not slow his footsteps, because he did not feel any discomfort. He sensed that the chi in his body was getting wilder and wilder, that his true essence was getting more and more active. But he had no idea that many lines had appeared on the surface of his body beneath his clothes. These lines were very complex, gradually forming a design that extended from his clothes to his face. In the faint red light emitted by the waves of heat, the design on his face seemed abnormally alive, strange and beautiful, and also brimming with strength. In the next moment, while he was completely unprepared, a smear of blood covered his eyes and countless needle-like hairs pierced through his skin. Accompanied by cracking sounds, his body grew taller, and he seemed to be filled with boundless might, even giving off a feeling of madness. He had gone berserk. Chapter 965. Just as Xin Yuan Po went berserk, the waves of heat coursing through the stone path suddenly exploded into true flames. An extremely ancient aura was emitted from the patterns on Xin Yuan Po's body, isolating the flames outside. But these true flames were the true form of the wildfire of the celestial trees, containing an unimaginable might. It caused the true essence and chi in Xin Yuan Po's body to vibrate in sync with the flames, making them even more berserk. In an instant, they broke through his meridians and chi openings and surged in all directions. Xin Yuan Po felt an unimaginable pain, like countless sharp knives were constantly stabbing into his body. His face became incomparably pale, beads of sweat the size of soybeans dripping from his forehead. After a while, he could no longer endure. With a low roar, he kneeled on one knee. With a boom, his mountainous body swayed twice. His steel-like knees smashed a shallow pit into the hard ground. The flying stone fragments tore open a few cracks in the wildfire, but they were quickly filled in the next moment. Because of those strange and beautiful patterns, the wildfire of the celestial trees had confirmed his identity as a demi-human, so it did not truly harm his body. However, the berserk true essence in his body could not be restrained from circulating at high speeds, ready to explode at any moment. Xin Yuan Po knelt in the flames, his eyes closed, his expression in extreme pain. His heavy gasps for breath seemed like they would never stop. After some time, he finally opened his eyes and gazed at the stone path in front of him. The wildfire in the stone path had already vanished. His eyes had regained their clarity, but they still contained a lingering fear and reverence. Not long after Xin Yuan Po broke through the baptism of the wildfire of the celestial trees, the two demi-human experts beneath the other two celestial trees also broke through. It was just that they were not like Xin Yuan Po, who had received Chun Chongqing's golden needles to expand his meridians in the Orthodox Academy. So their situation was much more dangerous, and they were in a much more miserable state. Their clothes had all been burned to shreds, and their bodies were stained with blood. Their footsteps towards the stone path were extremely unsteady, as if they could collapse at any moment. Xiaoda was truly worthy of being the demi-human expert ranked second on the proclamation of liberation. The baptism of the wildfire had no effect on him. This was primarily due to the fact that his cultivation level was far higher than that of Xin Yuan Po and the others, and also because he had once had the opportunity to experience the baptism of the wildfire many years ago. The one in the greatest danger was the young man in the bamboo hat. As he was under the greatest pressure, He was not a member of the Yao race and did not have the presence of wildfire left behind by his ancestors in his bloodline. No matter how much pressure he felt, he could not create those strange yet beautiful patterns on his body and face to protect himself. In other words, he could only rely on his cultivation and strength to endure. Not long after he entered the underground from the stone temple in the tree, the wildfire of the celestial tree sensed that he was not a demon. There was no rising heat wave coming from the stone path. Instead, there were countless terrifying, blazing flames coming at him. The wildfire of the celestial tree had no sense of gentleness or instruction to non-Yao life forms, only an extremely cold, killing intent. As he sensed the heat and pressure contained in the flames, sensed the brutal chi that seemed to come from the wilderness, the young man slightly raised his head and gazed at a smear of red in the depths of the stone path, his expression turning grave. This was the baptism of the wildfire. Demi-human experts only needed to rely on their powerful bodies and firm wills to pass, as their bodies already had the chi of the wildfire. As for non-demi-human experts, if they did not want to be burned to death by the wildfire of the celestial tree, they had to open up their sea of consciousness and allow the wildfire to transform their souls. The young man naturally did not want to die, nor would he choose the latter. So what should he do? The extremely drought-resistant polestar grass growing in the cracks of the stone wall, invisible to the naked eye, was burned into several hundred wisps of smoke. A smoke-like curtain draped down from the edge of the bamboo hat all the way to the ground, protecting his body. The wild and brutal wildfire of the celestial tree fell upon his body, but it was kept at bay by the smoky curtain. Accompanied by extremely low and ear-piercing chewing sounds, the curtain became thinner and thinner, and the smoke became fainter and fainter. The grave expression on his face became more and more real, but there was no fear, only caution and a hint of curiosity. If he just stood in the stone path and endured the endless wildfire of the celestial tree, even if his bamboo hat was a true divine artifact, it would still be consumed until it became useless. He had to pass through the wildfire before the bamboo hat completely lost its effect. He walked towards the flames that filled the sky. The light smoke falling from the edge of the bamboo hat could protect his face and body, but could not protect his feet. His footsteps were extremely heavy and slow. Every step he took would leave a clear mark on the stone floor. After an unknown period of time, the wildfire in the stone passageway suddenly disappeared. The light smoke falling from the edge of the bamboo hat was so faint that it could no longer be seen. A hint of pain occasionally flashed across the half of his handsome face that was exposed. In order to pass through this stone path, covered in wildfire, he had suffered some injuries. It was very painful, but most of it was heartache. He had used 2 divine artifacts that had been passed down in the demon palace for many years. He didn't know when he would be able to recover. The young man in the bamboo hat stood in front of a swamp, saying nothing. He naturally knew that this was not a true swamp. Even from several dozen zhang away, he could feel the suffocating waves of heat assaulting his face. Even the edges of his clothes were somewhat brittle. This place was too hot, even hotter than the baptism of the wildfire in the stone path. He was probably deep underground. This underground cavern was extremely large and spacious. Countless roots of various sizes hung down from the ceiling. These roots extended in all directions, burrowing deep into the black walls. These were probably the roots of the celestial trees. Whether it was the black walls or the swamp, the temperature was inconceivably high. The rays of light that came from the stone path and from some unknown place scattered before they even had time to descend. It was a mystery why the roots of the celestial trees were still alive and well. The entire cavern gave off a hallucinatory feeling. A rock fell from the top of the cliff, and, after 10 breaths of time, it finally landed in the swamp. A small hole was created in the surface of the swamp that was like frozen black oil. A flame shot out of this small hole, appearing like a dragon of fire. The flame landed on the walls of the cavern ceiling and transformed into countless sparks that engulfed the roots and began to burn. The so-called swamp was actually lava. The young man raised his head to the ceiling of the cave. As he saw the burning tree roots, his expression flickered. The roots weren't actually burning. Those sparks of fire were gradually extinguished. They had been devoured by those roots. The celestial trees actually needed the underground lava as their nourishment. He had an exalted status and vast experience, but this sight still left him rather stunned. As he thought about what he had to do, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Only when he grasped the two slightly cold objects in his sleeve did he feel a little better. Chapter 966. Perhaps because the ground was shaking, or because the air in the cavern was moving too quickly, the cobweb-like roots on the walls of the cavern were constantly trembling. With each tremble, a stone would drop from the ceiling, shattering the seemingly solid surface of the swamp. A flame would fly through the air and land on the walls, only to be devoured by the roots a few moments later. This was an extremely simple and complete process, but it was also rather frightening. From a certain perspective, this was the celestial tree hunting. The young man in the bamboo hat stood not too far from the swamp. He did not move, appearing very cautious. After digesting the shock brought by the celestial tree roots, his attention fell on an even deeper place. He noticed that the roots of the celestial tree were bearing vermilion fruits about the size of a fist. Like the roots, these fruits did not fear the extreme heat of the magma, so they were probably some very precious object. Then he heard a faint whistling sound coming from the deepest part of the swamp, followed by a similar sound coming from the cliffs at the top of the cave and the cave walls that were covered with black stone. It seemed to be some kind of echo, but it also sounded like a specific sound made by a specific object in a specific environment. The entire underground cavern was extremely hot. Whether it was the roots of the celestial tree, the vermilion fruits, or the black rock walls, although there were no flames, it was easy to imagine that if something like paper or leaves fell into the cavern, it would definitely be burned into smoke in the shortest time possible. And the source of this heat, the swamp, formed from magma. It was said that a solitary sun could not grow. Logically speaking, a scorching environment like this could not be preserved for long and would quickly crumble. But the wildfire of the celestial trees had been passed down in the demi-human race for countless years. His gaze fell on the black walls, gradually moving deeper. Although he could not see it with his own eyes, he could sense the existence of some object. This object was very small in size, but it was spread over a vast area in the cavern. It was like some sort of fragment, and its temperature was extremely low, exuding an unimaginable chill. The faint howl he had heard earlier was the sound of these frigid fragments clashing with the heat of the magma swamp. What could be so cold that it could resist the wildfire of the celestial trees? He quickly found the answer. These fragments were probably the crystallization of the deep freeze dragon breath of the black frost dragons. It was rumored that countless years ago, the black frost dragons played an extremely important role in the founding of the demi-human race. Even now, the entire demi-human race still worshipped the black frost dragon as a godlike existence. This must be the reason. If not for the black frost dragon tribe's generosity, even selflessness, in providing so many deep freeze dragon breath crystals, even if the demi-humans had obtained 9 celestial tree seeds as a sacrifice to the starry sky, they would not have been able to seal the underground wildfire and transform the incomparably savage world of ancient times into the beautiful realm of the demi-humans. After some time, the young man finished his observation and took a step toward the swamp. It was a very simple step, but the ground began to tremble violently. The surrounding black stone walls began to warp and distort as countless strange rays of light shone from them. The cliffs at the top of the cave also became extremely chaotic. The roots of the celestial trees seemed to have come to life, twisting and stretching like snakes. It was an extremely bizarre sight. Such a phenomenon naturally did not occur in the underground cave because he had taken a step forward. Instead, it was because some great existence had sensed his arrival. As the ground quaked, more and more small stones began to fall from the ceiling, ultimately falling into the scorching swamp. Many holes instantly appeared on the surface of the swamp that seemed to be congealed black oil, and several dozen streams of fire began to pour out of these holes one after the other. The roots of the celestial trees in the cliffs at the top of the cave were unable to completely devour these descending flames in a short period of time, so the melted cliffs began to collapse even faster. Countless stones rained down on the swamp, while countless streams of fire sprayed into the air. The entire underground cavern was filled with pillars of fire, weaving together and piercing through the ground. It was an abnormally magnificent and beautiful sight. The surface of the swamp was completely cracked open, the hot lava revealing its terrifying true appearance. It was constantly roiling like fruit pulp, or even more like blood, extremely bewitching. This lava was the source of the wildfire of the celestial trees. An unimaginably high temperature and pressure spread out in all directions. Although the light smoke hanging from the edge of the bamboo hat kept it at bay, the young man still began to sweat uncontrollably. In a very short amount of time, his clothes were soaked through. He took a handkerchief from his sleeve and wiped the sweat from his brow. He still did not seem disheveled, but rather very calm. The roiling lava exuded a terrifying heat, the chi of the wildfire enveloping the entire cavern. The countless pillars of fire seemed like some ancient sacrificial ceremony. Within these pillars of fire and red light, one could faintly make out some sort of picture, and then these pictures constantly changed. The young man's expression became abnormally grave as he stared at the pictures in the firelight. Even though he felt a stabbing pain in his eyes, he refused to blink. These pictures began with a city and a tall mountain, and then a plateau in the middle of the mountain. Then there were countless creatures, some common, such as elephants, lions, tigers, and wolves, while others were mystical, such as dragons and phoenixes. Then there were cows, sheep, geese, and horses. The young man stared at these pictures, a startled expression on his face. What sort of star is this? All these pictures ultimately vanished into the wildfire. The roiling lava parted like the sea, transforming into a platform shaped like a lotus. An elder wrapped in animal hide and with long hair draped over his shoulders appeared on the platform. This old man was obviously not real. He was just a projection of his mind. The cavern was spacious and several hundred zhang high, but this elder seemed to be tens of thousands of zhang tall, standing between the heavens and the earth. The young man stared at the elder in the wildfire, his expression unprecedentedly solemn, his pitch-black eyes brimming with wariness. The elder seemed like a true god, because from a certain perspective he was a god. He was the ancestral soul of the demi-human race. Beneath the other celestial trees, the ancestral souls of the demi-human race also appeared. Xin Yuan felt his body become abnormally heavy. Not daring to put up any resistance, he kneeled on the ground. The other two demi-human experts were even worse off. They had already kneeled on the ground, their bodies trembling as if they might faint at any moment. Xiaoda's condition was a little better, but only a little better. His face was pale, his eyes closed as he silently prayed, hoping to receive the blessing of the ancestral soul. The young man did not kneel. He only silently gazed at the figure of the ancestral soul in the wildfire, his thoughts inscrutable. Suddenly, the ancestral soul opened its eyes. Beneath the different celestial trees, the ancestral souls opened their eyes. A ray of light seemed to break through the boundary between mind and matter, falling upon Xiaoda, Xin Yuan Pe, and the other two demi-human experts. This ray of light also fell upon the young man. His face was abnormally pale in the light, but his eyes were bloodshot. This was because he was very excited, even somewhat deranged. It really is sacred light. Chapter 9, 67. This light was brimming with the chi of life, but it also possessed the power to destroy all things in the world. This light was not pure white, nor was it gold. It was mottled and complex, not pure. What was the wildfire of the celestial trees? The waves of heat in the stone path were not, nor were the pillars of fire shooting out of the swamp. This was the true wildfire. Countless years ago, the ancestors of the demi-humans obtained the true origin of the wildfire and hid it deep in the magma. Later on, only demi-human experts with incredible potential and talent had the chance to enter the depths of the celestial trees and sense the chi of the wildfire, using it to comprehend the true meaning of power. But why had the young man in the bamboo had said this? The wildfire of the celestial trees was sacred light? Sacred light from where? From Ali Palace? From Holy Maiden Peak? Or was it from that faraway continent? The massive projection of the ancestral spirit of the demi-humans fell into the spiritual worlds of Xiaoda, Xinyuanpe, and the others. The underground cave was filled with flames. They silently kowtowed to the tall figure in the flames. They didn't mobilize their true energy to protect their bodies, and they didn't even dare to have any thoughts of resisting. They just let the beam of light that came out of nowhere hit their bodies. As long as their loyalty and courage gained the approval of the ancestral spirit, the wildfire would enter their bodies. In a very short amount of time, it would transform and strengthen their bodies. Compared to the obstacles and improvements in the stone path, this was the true baptism of the wildfire. The young man did not kneel, did not close his eyes, and certainly did not pray. He stood in front of the sea of fire, his hands held behind him as he quietly gazed at the colossal ancestral spirit and sensed the chi of the wildfire. It was impossible to tell what he was thinking. He had taken the enormous risk of leaving Xiulao City to come here naturally because he wanted to express his sincerity in allying with the demi-humans. But that was the least important reason. He had truly come to White Emperor City for three things. The first was to investigate the secret of the ancestral spirit of the demi-humans and the wildfire of the celestial trees. The ancestral spirit of the demi-humans had already appeared, and the wildfire had fallen on his body. He and the military advisor had finally confirmed a conjecture that had existed for a very long time. The wildfire of the celestial trees truly was sacred light. To him, this was an extremely important matter. It could help him fill in the picture called history even more clearly. Madame Mu had probably already guessed that he had come to participate in the heavenly selection ceremony for some reason, like to personally see the wildfire and the ancestral spirit. There was even a chance that the White Emperor, cultivating deep in the mountains, knew of this matter. But these two saints probably did not care too much. The demons themselves did not really understand what the wildfire that had been passed down by their ancestors was. Every time he thought of this, the young man in the bamboo would find it hard to suppress his scorn and contempt. Moreover, while Madame Mu had guessed that he wanted to see the wildfire, and of the wildfire, the divine god, the with Wu Emperor of Gods. Moreover, while Madame Mu guessed that he wanted to see the wildfire, she also wanted to see how he would deal with it. He with of Chun of demon. He wanted to have demon, and he wanted to so of the god of the wildfire of with he of the current wildfire was countless times more powerful than the waves of heat in the stone path, and his two sacred artifacts of the demon race were already so heavily damaged that they could no longer be used. What method could he possibly use to endure? The pressure exuded by the ancestral spirit grew stronger and stronger, its body growing taller and taller. In some incomprehensible manner, it surpassed the several hundred zhang of space in the cave. In a dark part of the void, it gazed down at him like he was an ant on the ground. Whether it was in the dark void or in the real world, the scorching wildfire was everywhere, imbued with energy that could destroy all. His face grew paler and paler. More and more sweat flowed from his body, but before his clothes could be soaked, the sweat evaporated. From time to time, a hint of pain would flash across his delicate face. One could imagine what kind of torture he was enduring at this moment. But there was no fear on his face or in his black eyes, not even a hint of panic. When the figure of the ancestral spirit reached its tallest, about to burst through the starry sky, when the wildfire in the cave grew fiercer and fiercer, when the roots of the celestial trees began to truly burn, when the light smoke falling from his bamboo hat was burned into nothingness, and the edge of the hat began to burst with sparks. He took out two very small stone statues. These two statues were carved from some sort of stone. They seemed to be made of gold or jade, but they also gave off an incredibly smooth feeling. These two statues depicted two naked people. One indifferently stood upright, while the other had his hands on his knees, seemingly in thought. Although they were very small, they were extremely vivid and intelligent. If Byung Hong or Madame Mu were present, they would naturally recognize the origins of these two statues. These were the two angels from the sacred light continent. Black Robe had used some sort of method to turn them into two stone statues. These two stone statues had been quietly standing by the back gate of the courtyard in the western part of White Emperor City this entire time. Then, they had been brought here by the young man in the bamboo hat. He gripped the two angel statues and extended them into the wildfire. The wildfire that filled the sky seemed to sense something. After pausing for a moment, it became even wilder and fiercer, howling as it lunged at the two statues. The extremely hot and destructive chi of the wildfire touched the two statues and was instantly sucked away. The two angel statues themselves did not change. They only grew a little brighter, but they were still cold, like two black holes. The young man looked at the statues in his hands, his expression growing more and more solemn. Even his breathing seemed to stop. The wildfire continued to pour into the two angel statues, causing terrifying howls to rise up in the cavern. With the passage of time, the two angel statues grew brighter and brighter. At some point, the ancestral spirits of the demi-human race had dispersed. After some time, the wildfire in the cavern was finally sucked away by the two angel statues, and the temperature gradually returned to normal. The surface of the lava gradually solidified, returning to a grayish-black color. The roots of the celestial tree on the ceiling had been scorched into tatters. Presumably, it had not suffered such devastation in the last tens of thousands of years. The two statues gradually dimmed, ultimately returning to their original state. But compared to before, they had undergone a very secretive transformation. The lines on the statues had become more realistic, the emotionless faces of the angels more vivid. One could even faintly feel their eyelashes blink. It was like they really would come to life in the next moment. The young man looked at the two statues in his hands, many emotions appearing in his black eyes. There was wariness and fear, mockery and worry. These emotions were incomparably complex, ultimately transforming into a tinge of confusion. The first to end the baptism of the wildfire was Xiaoda, followed by Xinyuan Pe. The other two demi-human experts had not yet returned to the high platform. Suddenly, dark clouds gathered over the mountains. Thunder and lightning crackled as a torrential downpour descended. Mist rose from the mountains, a strange sight caused by the evaporation of the rain by the wildfire. Xiaoda suddenly turned to look at a certain mountain to the northeast. The moment he turned, the Xiang clan leader and many of the ministers and generals of the demi-human race also turned their gazes in that direction. The mist in that mountain was so thick that it instantly shrouded an area of several dozen li and then drifted into the sky. Vaguely, one could see the gigantic celestial tree swaying in the mountains, emitting a thunderous sound. Why was the wildfire burning so fiercely? Why was the celestial tree afraid? Just what was happening there? Chapter 968. A demi-human elder called out in alarm. What's going on here? No one answered his question, nor could they answer it. The officials of the demi-human court were currently hurrying over, and demi-human priests had always been on the mountain. It wouldn't take long before they knew the exact answer. Madame Mu had long ago noticed the phenomena on the mountain and had guessed at something. The young man in the bamboo hat was deep beneath the mountain. Only now did she realize that she had still underestimated Black Robe. Although it was impossible to ascertain the exact situation, it was obvious that the young man, perhaps even the entire demon race, had benefited greatly from the baptism of the wildfire. Just when she was considering whether or not she should go to the mountain and personally take a look, the phenomena in the distance gradually dissipated. The mist exuded by the celestial tree rapidly thinned, and the rumbling from deep underground gradually grew softer until it could no longer be heard. The Red River gradually calmed down. Neither Xiulao City nor the demi-human personages around the high platform noticed anything strange. However, The two He clan powerhouses who were still absorbing the wildfire from the celestial tree were greatly affected by it. Suddenly realizing that the wildfire had become incomparably fierce, one of the He clan experts felt fear and wanted to avoid it. In the end, he angered the ancestral spirit of the demi-human race and was knocked unconscious. Even if he managed to preserve his life, his meridians were all severed and his sea of consciousness damaged. He could no longer cultivate and could only become a cripple. The other He clan expert called Xia Luo performed much better. He was truly worthy of being a famous individual who had once gone to the capital to cultivate and had reached star condensation 20 years ago. In the face of the wildfire's sudden abnormality and the rumbling and quaking underground, his mind remained unshaken. He silently and steadily persisted until the end. At this point, 4 of the 5 people participating in the trial of the wildfire had already come out. The Xiang clan leader glanced at Madame Mu's profile. Unable to tell what she was thinking, he felt rather uneasy. After a short while, the young man, escorted by the priests and officials, finally returned to the high platform in the mountains by the shore. His clothes were full of burn holes, and one could even faintly smell a burnt smell. The bamboo hat that always covered his face was also burned into a few large holes, and the bamboo branches were sticking out haphazardly. He looked very wretched, like a real beggar on the side of the road. Countless gazes fell on the young man's body, filled with prying, curiosity, and wariness. Why had the celestial tree he had gone to cause such a disturbance? This was what everyone wanted to know. Moreover, everyone wanted to know just what this mysterious young man looked like. The bamboo hat that had been damaged by the wildfire just so happened to be a precious opportunity. The sight of this dazzling white made many demi-human personages recall a name that was gradually being forgotten by the continent: Tianhai Xingxue. Seeing that blinding white, many of the demi-human personages recalled a name that was gradually being forgotten by the continent: Tianhai Xingxue. Tianhai Xingxue was also very famous among the demi-humans, not only because of his military exploits in Blue Pass and Snow Pass, but also because of his snow-white skin. Those who had seen Tianhai Xingxue felt that the white of the two was different. This young man's face was like melting snow. It seemed transparent and possessed an extremely bizarre allure. The Xiang clan leader was also looking at this young man, a hint of wariness gradually appearing in his serene eyes. He knew this young man's identity, so he found it even more impossible to understand what had happened today. Since he was a demon, even a descendant of the imperial clan, how could he endure the pressure of the ancestral spirits and the power of the wildfire? Had he truly been willing to offer his spiritual world to the ancestral spirits, to completely convert his body and bloodline to the White Emperors? Had he truly been willing to offer his spiritual world to the ancestral spirits, to completely convert his body and bloodline to the White Emperors? No, the Xiang clan leader would never believe that he would do this. Both Xiaoda and Xianyuan Pa had used other methods to pass the trial of the ancestral spirits, so this person should also have used other methods. The Shi clan leader was also looking at the young man. Perhaps he had noticed something, but his expression gradually turned grave. Under countless gazes, the young man still maintained his calm. The atmosphere around the high platform was extremely oppressive, and it was getting more and more tense. But neither Madame Mu nor the chief elder of the Xiang clan had said anything, so no one dared to jump out and question him. The proceedings of the heavenly selection ceremony continued, though it was already rather tasteless. The final event was extremely simple. It was the human selection that had been mentioned yesterday in the imperial city. The 4 people who had passed the baptism of the wildfire would fight in 2 pairs, and then the victors would fight. Xianyuan Po's opponent was the He clan expert called Xia Luo. Xiaoda's opponent was the mysterious young man in the bamboo hat. Upon seeing this result, stifled cries of alarm rose up from around the high platform. The most eye-catching match was naturally the second match. Xiaoda looked at the young man's tattered bamboo hat, his eyes narrowing as if he wanted to say something. The Shi clan leader's expression changed once more. He ordered his clansmen to take Xiaoda away. not giving him a chance to speak. The He clan leader took Xia Luo away. The Bear clan leader took Xin Yuanpo away. The tribal leaders had moved so quickly that the ministers and elders of the court had no time to react. They had not even bowed to Madame Mu or the Xiong clan leader before they left. The oppressive and tense atmosphere did not disappear. On the contrary, it only intensified. On the top deck of the ferry back to White Emperor City, the conversation between Xiaoda and the Shi clan leader did not proceed too smoothly. The Shi clan leader demanded that he give up on the heavenly selection. Even the most ignorant of the poor of the lower city knew that Xiaoda could not accept this. The Shi clan leader stared into his eyes and said, "You were worried that the throne would fall into the hands of the great Western continent. There's no need for that now, so why do you still persist?" Xiaoda replied, "I know that the clan is not willing for me to inherit the White Emperor's bloodline, but you should be able to see that I have other methods. So what? If His Majesty or the Empress really wanted to make you their successor, did they not have other methods?" The Shi clan leader sighed, "But none of this is important. If you really could inherit the throne, even if you had to change the ownership of the bloodline, I would still support you." Xiaoda's voice chilled. "Then why did you do this today?" "Because this matter is no longer possible." After a moment of silence, the Shi clan leader said, "We did not expect that His Majesty and the Empress had already chosen a successor." Xiaoda was also quiet for a while, then asked, "You mean that fellow?" The Shi clan leader replied, "I presume that you have also guessed at something." Xiaoda replied, "No matter who that young man is, he will not affect me." The Shi clan leader sternly said, "This matter is far too important to the demi-human race. The Empress will not permit you to ruin it, nor will His Majesty." Xiaoda asked, "Who can be sure that this is His Majesty's will?" The Shi clan leader replied, "Old Xiong personally went to the mountains 2 nights ago." Xiaoda harshly rebuked, "Even if His Majesty thinks this, he is still wrong." Chapter 969. There were some minor problems with the plot in the last few sentences of the last chapter. I have modified them in this document and report them to everyone here. The battle of divine domain experts that had taken place in the sky a few days ago, the activation of the strongest seal on the 2 shores of the Red River to cut off communication, the great Western continent's diplomatic mission, and the abrupt heavenly selection ceremony. All of these recent events had made the atmosphere in White Emperor City abnormally oppressive and tense. Just because the demi-human leaders and powerful figures like them had maintained their silence did not mean that they were truly indifferent. Even though their secret investigations had been pressured by the imperial court and even some factions of the Council of Elders, they had still found many clues and were gradually approaching the truth. Today, the great Western continent's second prince had suddenly withdrawn from the baptism of the wildfire of the celestial trees, causing all their gazes to fall on the young man in the bamboo hat. Figures like the Shi clan leader and Xiaoda had already faintly guessed that this young man came from the north. The humiliation of tens of thousands of years, the blood enmity of countless ancestors. Could it really be forgotten like this? Xiaoda's voice was very cold and very sharp, like a real blade. The Shi clan leader turned his head to look at the high platform in the mountains. The river was wide, and the mist had reappeared, making it impossible to make out the figures on the high platform. We once had a deep hatred with the human race, just like how the elves ultimately perished at the hands of the demon race. But if you ask the elves who they hated the most, they would absolutely say it was the humans in the capital. But now, who still remembers these things for back then? The ancestral plains of the elf race have been occupied by the demon race, and later reclaimed by the human race. But the few remaining members of the elf race did not choose to return to the plains. Instead, they preferred to travel tens of thousands of li across the ocean to live in the distant great Western continent. Presumably, this was related to their bone-deep hatred for the human race. The relationship between the humans, demi-humans, and demons living on this continent was far too complicated. There were far too many grudges in history, and it was very difficult to explain them all in a few words. But Xiaoda was a person who lived in this era. He had a natural inclination toward emotions. and he deeply disliked the demon race. Even if we form an alliance with Shualao City, why hold the heavenly selection ceremony? Could it be that we will welcome a foreign race as emperor? Even if it was just saying these words, he felt that it was very difficult and heavy. His teeth felt cold and even a little painful. He simply could not imagine how furious he and the tribesmen on the two shores of the Red River would be if such a thing really happened. The Sher clan leader said, "It should be just a marriage alliance. It has nothing to do with the throne." Xiaoda slightly arched his brows. If Her Highness is married off to Shualao City, who will the throne pass to? The Sher clan leader was silent for a very long time before voicing his speculation. Xiaoda's expression suddenly changed, an earthen yellow luster appearing in the depths of his eyes. A ruthless and terrifying qi surged out of his body. The whistling river wind met his heavy and hurried breathing and instantly disappeared without a trace. Is her ladyship treating us like the enlightened clan's people? The Sher clan's clan leader smiled bitterly and said, "The imperial court and the council of elders have made a move at the same time. It's no wonder that we couldn't find anything specific. However, even if we did, what could we do?" Xiaoda suddenly asked, "Just who is that young man?" The Sher clan leader said, "We will know the answer tomorrow. Tomorrow would be a new day." To every person who would continue living, this phrase was true, and it was often tedious. Because when tomorrow comes, you will realize that tomorrow is not much different from the days you have already spent and the mornings you will have after tomorrow. But to Madame Mu, tomorrow was not the same as the mornings she had experienced in the past countless years. She was confident that something rather new and interesting would happen tomorrow. She stood by the railing at the highest point of White Emperor City, gazing at the multitude of stars and drifting clouds in the night sky. She calmly thought, "All of you have lived another day." She was thinking of Biyanghong and Wuqiongbai. The seal on the two shores of the Red River had been lifted, and White Emperor City was no longer as heavily guarded as it had been that night because of the heavenly selection ceremony. But in reality, she had never relaxed in her pursuit of these two experts of the continent. Several hundred of the most elite Red River Beast Guard and the high-level internal attendants of the Imperial Court had been secretly searching White Emperor City this entire time. She was confident that the heavily injured Biyanghong and Wuqiongbai could not escape White Emperor City. But why had she never found this couple? Just where are they hiding? Since you have sought my protection, you must prove that you have the right to be protected by me. There was a pear tree by the railing in front of the stone hall, its shadow clearly visible in the starlight. As Madame Mu spoke, the tree's shadow suddenly twisted as if coming to life. Then it began to bulge, transforming into a kneeling person. If one were to say that someone as ugly as him could be called a human, then he would definitely be a human. This person had his face buried, his back bulging, his body reeking of blood. Two gray wings of flesh drooped on his back. It was that monster from the longevity sect called Chusu. A few days ago, he had fled Wenshui and encountered Xiao Zhang in the river gorge. His sneak attack had succeeded, but he did not dare to linger. Logically speaking, he should have met up with the Imperial Court's diplomatic mission or returned to the longevity sect to hide, but he did not choose this. Because besides Chun, Chongsheng, and the people of the Orthodoxy, there was also the Tang clan that wanted to kill him. The blind zither player had given him a chance to live, having used up all his affection. Not even the Imperial Court could protect the person the Tang Old Master wanted to kill, much less the longevity sect. The territory of the Great Zhou was vast, but he realized that there was no safe place for him, so he used his fastest speed to travel to the distant demi-human realm. In his view, only the Saint of White Emperor City could protect him and be willing to use him. But he had not expected that the moment he appeared, before he even had time to catch his breath, he would receive such a terrifying mission. "There's someone called Xinyuan Pe. I'll kill him while I'm at it." Madame Mu's expression was extremely calm and indifferent, as if she was handing over some extremely unremarkable, trifling matter. To her, the demi-human race and the great Western continent, tomorrow would be a brand new day. She would not permit any accidents to occur. Xin Yuanpa did not know what would happen tomorrow. He only wanted to ensure that nothing would happen. The greatest problem he faced was that White Emperor City was abnormally far from the capital. Other than experts of the divine domain, no one could come and go as they pleased. The seal over the two shores of the Red River truly had weakened, and the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes and the embassy had long ago sent news of the heavenly selection ceremony. Judging from the change in attitude of the great Zhou officials, the capital's reply should have already arrived, but when would it arrive? Bi Yonghong looked at Xin Yuanpa and said, "The second prince's sudden withdrawal means that this is not an alliance between the demi-human race and the great Western continent. The venerable Taoist master might have already seen through the fog, so his stance is so clear and unyielding, wanting you to destroy this matter at all costs." Xin Yuanpa was somewhat confused, asking, "Shouldn't the great Zhou imperial court be very happy?" Bi Yonghong directly touched on the core of the matter. There's definitely something wrong with the identity of that young man in the bamboo hat. Xin Yuanpa had a rather wooden personality, but he was no fool. He vaguely guessed at something and incredulously said, "How could this be?"